Let me see.
Join with computer audio.
This meeting.
Don't know. I don't. Can we talk later? Okay. All right.
Well, good morning, everyone. And welcome to the July 15th Oversight Board meeting of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. When we go ahead and get started here today, we have a very aggressive agenda to get through, and I would like to move it along just as quickly as we can. So as we can, we have a lot of questions to ask today and a lot of things to discuss. So let's just get started and do the best we can to get through our entire agenda. So again, welcome to the meeting. I appreciate that. This is it's a real important meeting today to deal with some issues that have been happening around Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and I think it's an opportunity for the Oversight Board to have an opportunity to weigh in on some of the seriousness of the issues and how we can proceed forward to look to a positive outcome and a more positive future with our children and our children's programs. So I'm not going to expand on this much longer. My co-chair, Sharonda, would you have some words to say this morning?
Thank you so much, Representative Dent. First of all, I just want to welcome the Oversight Board members that have joined us today. And for those that could not make it, I want to extend gratitude for your dedication in serving the children, youth, and families here in Washington State. And a special thank you to the members of the public who have joined us today. I also want to just extend an appreciation to Secretary Hunter and his team that will be joining us. The conversation ahead, I am most assured, will be challenging. However, I'm also assured of our collective goal of supporting children and families. While our approaches and ideologies may differ, we are all centered on addressing the needs of children and families and providing appropriate and relevant resources to address those identified needs, with always the primary objective of assisting families in ways that preserve them as a constellation and provide meaningful and supportive assistance. Today, our conversation will be centered on taking a deeper dive into issues that have been adversely impacting children, youth, and their parents and the staff at DCYF. And we understand that there's a growing need here in Washington. And we hope that this meeting today will provide a bit of guidance and understanding and support to all, but especially to the children and youth. It will not be easy to cover as much ground as we will like within this slotted time together. So if you have any questions or concerns or follow-up, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or Representative Dent, as we always want to hear from you. And I am now going to turn it over to Krista.
Thank you, Sharonda, and I will do roll call for the DCYF Oversight Board members that are present. So please, when I call your name, unmute yourself and just let me know that you are here. Katie Byron.
Present.
Thank you, Katie. Annie Blackledge.
Here. Hi, everybody.
Thank you. Justice Bobby Bridge.
Here.
Senator Jeannie Darneal. Representative Tom Dent.
Representative Dent is here.
Sydney Forrester. Lonnie Greniger. Ben DeHaan.
Morning, Ben here.
Morning, Ben. Ruth Kagi. Annie Lee, Dr. Diane Levy,
Present.
Charles Loeffler,
Here, good morning.
Lois Martin,
Present.
Shonda Slevenoff,
Here.
Representative Tana Sen, Senator Judy Warnick,
Here.
and I always like to check that our Assistant AG, Stacia Haller, is on the call as well.
I am.
Thank you, Stacia. And with that, I will turn it back over to Representative Dent.
Thank you, Krista. And we do have a quorum, is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Don't play with that, buddy. You're gonna break it.
Thank you. So
Everybody, he's in a meeting.
I'd appreciate it
Your
if
little
everyone would mute their microphones unless you're speaking. It would help with the background noise and help us to be more respectful of everyone on the call or in the meeting. So we've all been sent a copy of the April 15 minutes. Is there any additions, corrections that need to be made to those minutes from any of the members? If not, the minutes will stand as submitted. So we'll move right along here, and I see that Secretary Hunter is with us this morning. So we'll move into our presentation and with Secretary Hunter. So, Mr. Secretary, we have several questions, and we know that you have received those questions, and I'm going to ask that you be concise and direct with your answers so we can get through this entire list of questions. Would be most certainly appreciated by not only myself, but the entire board.
Hi.
So,
I'm sorry, Representative Dent, have you ever encountered a scenario where I was not concise? Please don't laugh out loud. I will endeavor to be concise.
I'm just going to let that question go this morning, Mr. Hunter, is simply because of our friendship that we have. But I do thank you for being here, and I appreciate your willingness to take these questions head on as you always do. And I know that you're in a difficult position, so we're here to listen to what you have to say and see how we can be supportive as we do go forward and to make the best of the situation. So we'll begin. You do have a list of the questions, so we'll begin with question one. The DCYF's internal process for validating what was reported in the King 5 investigative report. So question one, we can all agree that the behavior described in the King 5 investigation is unacceptable. DCYF leadership has already stated in follow-up platforms that the tactics mentioned in the investigative report to coerce youth into accepting placements described by former and current caseworkers is not actually in practice. So A, can you describe for the board the internal steps DCYF has already taken since the airing of this investigative report on May 20th, 2021 to validate whether or not these tactics are being practiced? Second part, can you describe steps DCYF is going to take to determine which, if any of these allegations are true, if a thorough investigation has already taken place? And C, does DCYF have an investigation timeline to comply access to the use of these alleged practices?
Okay, so talk about how we were asked a lot of questions by King 5 prior to them airing the report, as typically is what happens in this kind of investigative journalism. We started a process to go look at what we are doing, what we have done historically. The particular reports from the workers that were on those TV things describe some scenarios. We walked through the particular scenarios that we think were described by those workers, and we talked to our staff and figure out those particular scenarios. And then we start looking at the general practice across the agency. So when you use words like investigation, they have meaning, they have legal meaning. we use human resources investigations with the quote marks to look at HR misconduct. So if we have a particular scenario where one worker, one-off, does something, has sex with a client, there are criminal things, there are HR behavioral things that we would, quote, investigate with our internal HR investigative staff. The concern here is not that. The concern is what's the general practice across multiple regions and multiple cases. And so we can do an internal investigation. What we decided to do was to depend on an external investigation by the ombuds, by Patrick Dowd, who's clearly here on the phone. Patrick has full access to our staff, and I have not heard any concerns from Patrick about that. We've been clear to our staff that they are to provide full access. Patrick, on his own, has full access to family, to every single written document that we create internally on these. If he needs internal access to email, we can figure out a way to provide that. We're pretty open in working with the ombuds, and I hope that Patrick will say the same thing, and if not, then we'll go fix that. We chose to not do duplicate investigations because if they come up with, one, it's irritating to staff to have multiple people ask them the same questions, and two, we're likely to come to slightly different conclusions. And then you will ask, why does the independent guy say something different than the internal guy? And I'd rather just have one. And we trust Patrick to do a fair work on that. So we're going to depend on the independent look at historical practice or at current practice in this as the quote investigation that we're doing, because we're concerned about practice. If there are specific HR concerns that arise out of that about behavior on our staff, we'll take appropriate HR action on this. So I think that's the question about how do we approach doing investigations. The scenarios that we're talking about here can be characterized in lots of different ways. You guys have seen I'm not going to present you a lot of charts and graphs today, in fact, none. If you want them, we can send them over. The hotel stay problem has been increasing for the last 5 to 7 years and is very complex. We've sent some recommendations both to the governor's office and to the legislature on how to address problems a little bit upstream. I think the report that came out this week from King 5 pointed out some of the challenges with mental health, and they didn't really talk so much about developmental disabilities, but we have similar issues. Almost all of the children that are in the frequent users category of the hotel stays have very challenging behaviors. And that's a euphemism. And if you watch the King 5 report from this week, you'll get a sense of what that is. We don't, and I'm not gonna speak in public about the behavior of individual children, because I think that is damaging to the children. They have privacy rights around their behavioral health issues. And I'm trying to not make a situation for a youth who's experienced a lot of trauma in the world worse. But our staff get assaulted. And we have kids who don't, if you have a kid and you have a placement, and it's challenging to find placements for children who have had assaultive behavior with caregivers in the past. All of our placements are voluntary. We don't have state-run facilities that are the placement of last resort. If we have a placement option for some of our most challenging youth, we typically do not have a lot of placement options for them. And we drive the kid to the place. And then we'll try and talk the kid into going in. And if the youth in this case won't go in. We're going to spend a long time. Now, the scenarios that were described on TV are extreme cases of that. And we will go look at those in particular. None of us want to have that happen. The alternative in almost all of those cases is to then have the youth in a hotel or in the office. We've agreed with the federal court to not have these youth in offices. We actually would much prefer to not have them in offices. Sometimes we don't have a hotel because the hotels have denied us the ability to use that hotel anymore for that particular youth. Like they won't house that kid because of other behavior that's occurred in the things. Again, I don't really want to have that. I don't want to characterize the behavior of individual youth. So I'm gonna stop there in terms of what the current situation is. We will work with the ombuds on his investigation. We'll provide access to information he needs on that. I'd prefer to spend most of my opportunity with you, though you guys control how you want me to spend my time with you, talking about where we go from here in dealing with a situation that is super challenging.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that. Does any of the board members have any follow-up questions on this? Okay, thank you. So I was a little neglectful for the public that is in here. We will have a public comment period a little later during the meeting. So we do want to hear from you as well. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, for that answer. We're going to go to question 2, and I would appreciate it if you could just keep it just a little more concise and to the point so we can get all the way through these questions. That would be most certainly appreciated. Was DCYF aware of any complaints about workers depriving children of basic necessities before the King 5 story aired?
No, we have bedding in all of our offices that are where we would have children stay. There's some very small offices that we would never have a kid stay in there. We have bedding material. We occasionally, and I've briefed some of the legislators on this committee. I'm happy to brief other members privately because it's information about individual cases that you're entitled to have, but that we're not going to do in public because, again, about the privacy of children. Both of the reports on that were, we believe, about a single case where a youth made a decision that was appropriate for the youth, and we supported the youth in that. So I don't, I got briefed you on the specific case and that we have bedding in all of the offices. And we're, I actually did a survey of that several weeks ago. And if you would like to be buried in pictures of bedding in offices, we'd be happy to send it to you. But we went and looked all over the state for that. Made sure that we have it. We see pictures. People took cell phone pictures of the bedding materials.
Okay, thank you. Does any of the board members have a follow-up question for the secretary?
Yeah, I do. So when we're talking about bedding, were we just talking about blankets and pillows? Are we talking about cots? The concern, of course, is that they would be on the floor.
We would view, we've agreed with the federal court that we would only use stay in an office in an emergent situation. And we're happy to report on how often that happens. It should be infrequent, like really infrequent. We have either cots or inflatable beds available. I mean, they're not just sleeping on the floor. We have blankets. We have a set. We have, and I'm not sure whether it's cots with little X wooden things or whether it's inflatable mattresses. The inflatable mattresses are more comfortable, but have a problem where they are easily damaged by youth and often have to be replaced. Like often right while the kid is there, we have to go out to Walmart and get another one. But that's what we're doing there. It's only, I think we only have what sort of looks like an apartment for a youth in one office, which we would prefer not to reproduce. We don't really have the authority to house children in our offices, which is why we are happy to agree with the federal court to not do it. But there are emergencies where it happens. We have bedding, we have cots, we have inflatable mattresses, we have all the bedding material that you should need to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Did that answer your question, Sharonda?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
If you have a specific question, we'd be happy to send you, show you, follow up with you if you want.
Thank you. So next steps regarding the King 5 investigative report findings. So with the question 3, what if these accusations are validated? What is the department's plan to stop these practices? What are the department's concrete steps to address and remedy these issues identified in the King 5 report?
Okay, we're doing a couple things. That's my favorite question here.
Good.
Is one, we're working super hard with Children's Hospital in particular and Mary Bridge. When we look at some work we've had RDA doing in terms of the population of children in foster care, they did some characterizations based on the diagnosis. They looked at 3 or 4 years worth of data for all of the kids in the foster care system and are trying to do some descriptive analytics about it. And about 2% of the children are in a category of externalizing behaviors where they are on multiple psychotropic drugs and have externalizing behaviors, which are often violent. This is often compounded with a developmental disability diagnosis. We have about 1% that are similar in terms of multiple prescriptions, but are internalizing behavior. The second category is more likely to be girls. With the first category, more likely to be boys, but neither of those are exclusive. So to provide that, most of these children who have experienced multiple placement exceptions are kids who come into our care not because, and so that total of 3% are not usually in care because of reports of abuse or neglect. They're in care because their parents could no longer manage them. They could no longer manage the behavioral health issue. The suicide risk is the internalizing risk, or the violence has been the externalizing risk. And so they're in some kind of placement as a result of that. And again, not because of abuse or neglect. For the ones with severe mental health challenges, the place where they come into our care is usually from the 2 hospitals. And we're working with those hospitals and we're working with the healthcare authority to ensure that their healthcare provider provides them with the inpatient psychiatric bed that they really need. We've wrapped the families with support from our voluntary services work to both some of the work that we've done with families of JR kids, but also child welfare. There's some overlap in our service provision here to help the families build a support network to manage those kids. What do we need to put in place for the family to be able to manage the kid? Or does the kid need to be in an inpatient psychiatric bed and not in the child welfare system? being in the child welfare system causes further damage to children. Like it creates illegal sanctions on their parents, makes it difficult for their parents to get like medical licenses where they want to be a nurse in the future because they have a founded finding against them. So we're trying to not do that and have the healthcare system provide behavioral health services for these children. That's what you saw in the report this week. Is we're working with that, particularly with Children's Hospital. They've been great to work with, but we're saying no, and we're not going to have youth released from hospitals where it is not safe to do the discharge. And that's a change in practice, particularly in King and Pierce counties and in Vancouver in Region 6. We're also working with King County Detention, which has a lot of the same issues, and we'll expand this work to other counties where we'll often get a youth who the parents can't really manage the kid at home. And how do we provide support for that youth? No allegations of child abuse or neglect. And it's not safe for us to manage the kid in overnight stay in a hospital. And it's very hard, as you might imagine, to find a foster care placement. And it's challenging. The youth often don't want to live in the congregate facilities, which are sort of the option for kids in that scenario. So we then have a kid who refuses placement options that we can get, but wants something that we can't get. And that escalates and causes. So we're trying to push back on those systems and keep kids served in the appropriate system. They're either can be served in the developmental disability system, kids who need a placement, their parents can't manage them, but the parents are fine. We don't have a challenge with the parent. We want to make sure that the DD system manages that. So we're also doing this project with DD. That's starting to bear fruit in getting kids. We're seeing a reduction in King County, and you'll see that data over the next couple of months as we do that. So the first start is to turn off the inflow into the system. The second is we've got kids in the system today who need to be served, and you guys, the legislature in particular, has created some capacity that is very slow to come online because it's hard to build. You've added some more clip beds. Those are being added. We've implemented BRS Plus. I believe we have 8 of those beds online, and we're working through more providers to try and get them to provide that BRS Plus level of service. What I'm finding is that those are, I thought that would be adequate to solve the problem, and it will not be. What we are now looking at, and we have, we upped the level of staffing internally in our child welfare programs office to create a much more curated set of placement options for youth. We believe that their space that is missing is a supported living space for 16 and 17-year-olds where we have intensive case management, but it is more like individual apartments because we do not have the ability to, it's like, I'm trying to not use unattractive analogies. We would like to be able to say, here's your living option and have it just work out. And if it's not acceptable to the youth, they don't go in. And then we're stuck in a situation where we have a kid in a parking lot in the middle of the night, and they won't go into a group placement, but we don't have an individual family home that's willing to manage that set of behavior. So we are working to try and figure out what are that new set of options. We'll continue to report with you on what that new option space looks like. We will find a way to provide a broader set of placement options more appropriate for children. I would like to have these children not served in child welfare, because I think it would be better for us to serve them in the behavioral health system. But we have these kids, we will serve them.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So again, I'm going to ask you if you could shorten your answers a little bit to the questions that I asked, and I know where your heart is, and I know what you're explaining to us, but we have a lot to get through here, and I'd like to address this a little more directly. So the next question is this is a short answer question.
Okay, Rep Dent, this is Senator Warnock. I have a real quick question for
Absolutely, Senator.
Secretary Hunter. Hopefully it'll be quick. So good to see you today, Mr. Hunter. Can you give us any idea of how many kids each night or each month that might fit in the category that we're talking about? Hard to place.
Absolutely. We report on placement exceptions. We have a report up online on our website where you can look at the data daily. We're trying to, it shows you the number of placement exceptions per month. And more interesting is what's sort of the average daily population, like how many kids do we have in hotel stays? I would say anecdotally, King County at one point was at 15. That number has dropped significantly. I tried to go visit an office that, all right, it was a Friday night, I wanted to go see where kids were in offices. And I called my area administrator and said, all right, where are they tonight? He said, we don't have any kids in offices. It's like, man, I was ready to go visit. So it's coming down a little bit. I will send you the link to the report, to the live tracker that we have up on our website. It is tracking our placement exception reports.
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Dent, may I ask another question as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Secretary Hunter, thank you for your comments so far. With regard to the question about what's in the works, what the department's plans are, you did mention earlier assaults on staff members, and we received, as staff, we received a message from Jody earlier this week about the department's intention to look into this and make some plans. Can you comment a little bit about what plans are to keep staff safe as well?
We're trying to figure out what you'd like us to do, first off. So I've asked people to go out and pull together a group of field staff. I'm particularly focused on after-hour staff. Though the example of I got an earful from our leadership team on this earlier in the week. Example of one of our staff being punched in the face happened during the day. So it's not just after hour staff, but we want to bring staff in and here. There are a bunch of particular choices. What we're finding is that the police, which has been our last resort, are not helpful. You saw that in that video that on King 5 this week. And so we had a group of young people caused tens of thousands of dollars of damage to 4 of our offices in May and June, and police watched and wouldn't intervene. So we're going to have to figure out how to provide safety staffing. Our ability to hire security guards is not always the right choice because they're not trained in how to de-escalate situations. So we're looking at some staffing options where we have a group of people cross-trained across some of our JR training does do that, though we have to be careful because the standards are quite different in terms of what you're allowed to do. We have the right response level 4 training, but I can't have a 110-pound caseworker try and manage the behavior of a much larger youth. I'm not asking people to do that. We're looking at what kind of cars we have available because some of the assaults have happened while people were being transported. We're not allowed to use the cars that JR has, which have the back seat locks because the youth are incarcerated. But maybe there are some options that are more like taxi cabs where the front seat locks, so we can provide some safety for our staff. But we're going to have to provide some staff, a quick response staff that can deal with escalated situations and de-escalate them, but ensure that our staff are safe. And again, we used to use law enforcement for that. That doesn't seem like it's going to work. So I'm open to other suggestions. I don't want to decide off the cuff, Charles. I actually want to hear from our staff about what they think would be helpful.
Representative Dent, I have two
Yes,
really
go ahead,
quick questions.
Rhonda.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
two really quick questions. The first question is, what is the ages of the children that are staying in hotels or in offices? And then the follow-up is that in what you just conveyed to us, one of the options you had said was you were having communications with the King County Detention Juvenile. Could you expand on exactly what that looks like and why that relationship would be an option?
Okay. First question is straightforward. We'll get kids in hotels of all ages. If we have to remove a child at 2 o'clock in the morning, the most rational, and it's an infant, say, the most rational thing might be to have the caseworker and the kids stay in a hotel until we can actually communicate with placement options in the morning. But that's not the problem here, right? That's been going on forever. It happens infrequently. It's just not that big a deal. The problem is the repeated stays in hotels, in placements that are not intended as places for kids to live, hotels and offices. And those are typically 14 to 17 years. They're older teens and with a tilt towards older. The 16, 17-year-old is the bulk of it. And again, we can get you descriptive statistics on that if you'd like. Can you say again the second question?
You had mentioned that you were having as a possible option, you had mentioned relationship with the King County Juvenile.
Oh, no, it's not a placement option.
I didn't say it was you didn't say it was a placement option. You listed it as one of relationships.
Yeah, we have to have a relationship with them because they call us and say, we have a kid here, we want you to come get him. And what we want to do is we want to know in advance when someone's about to be released, where they think the parents are not going to come pick them up, so that we can do intensive work with the parents, with the family in advance to try and create a situation where the kid can go home. Because we would like the kid to go home. It's better for the kid and it's better for the system. So that's the relationship we're trying to build, is to be proactive about like what is going to happen and not get a call at 8 o'clock at night says, we're going to release this kid and we're going to drop them off at your office in West Seattle. Is that what you want? Or do you want it to go to the other office? And we're like, what? So trying to be able to do some proactive planning about youth who potentially cannot return to their home if there have been an offense against other family members. That's often the case where the family says, we can't manage that behavior. And we'd like to find a solution that does not involve making that child a dependent child and having that finding on the parents. So that's trying to be proactive about that planning.
Thank you, Secretary Hunter.
Any other questions at the moment from the board?
Secretary Hunter, good morning. This is Lois Martin. I do have a question. For the children who King County in those scenarios calls you in the evening and says, come and get this child, what type of agreement do you have with King County where you have to say yes if you don't have proper accommodations for that child and you know you don't? That's question number one, and then question number two, and just listening to the description of the children, that it seems to be difficult to place. It seems like a lot of the onus is being placed on their behavior and not the ineffectiveness of the system to support them. So I would like to hear a little bit more from you about what, I know you shared some things, but it just still feels to me that that is part of it, is you're acting up. So this is you kind of get what you get because it's all we can do.
Well, thank you, Lois.
A and then B, and then I'll let you know if I have a follow-up.
Okay, so yeah, two is my limit to hold in my head of questions. So the first question is, it's not really like we don't have a service level agreement with King County on this or with any of the counties. If our agency has some legal responsibilities. One of them is to respond to allegations of child abuse or neglect, right? So we have a whole system to do that. And the allegation in this case is that there's a youth whose parents have abandoned them. That's sort of how the legal space, because there is no apparent parent. I can't quote the law off the top of my head. Judge Bridge might be able to do that, but I cannot. But essentially, if there's a child who's been abandoned, someone has to step in and manage that, and that is us. The complicated thing is, what if it's what if it's a kid who runs away from home? The parents aren't abandoning them, but the kid won't go home. Like, there's a lot of complexity around teens that in the sort of homeless teen space, where we're probably not the best suited agency to respond to all of those cases. And there's a lot of overlap, and then there's a big hole in terms of services available to homeless teens for a variety of reasons. So we don't have a service level agreement with King County about that. But we do, when they have when there's a youth who isn't, whose parents have abandoned them, they bring them to us. That's what the police do. And if we have a youth, then we have to respond. And then, I'm sorry, your second question.
Okay, so yeah, I think that is something that maybe the department can look into, and maybe making it a little bit clear about those stipulations, even if it's something as simple as, if you want us to take a child into custody, they need to be released into our care by a certain time during the day, and not at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night when it's difficult to place them. That's just one thing that I can see. The second question has to do with just the description of the children, and basically it came across as there being, problem children, and that's why they're hard to place. And in knowing that, and that that these children are going to be in the place in the care of DCYF. If you know a child is coming to you with, and especially if they're coming from JR with that, or from King County Juvenile with that type of background, shouldn't there automatically be a plan in place to have the mental health or whatever type of social work needs that should be ready and available for that child, regardless of whether they're teen or younger? I understand, raised a teenage boy, understand how they can be teenagers, challenging at times, but it still seems that the department should be ready for this, because you mentioned earlier that this has been ongoing, so it's nothing new. So if that's the case, then why hasn't the type of support that these children need been changed over time?
The answer to the last question is because we weren't smart enough to figure it out. The problems that grow over time are challenging to see how severe they are sometimes. This is on me in not responding aggressively enough early enough. The change in societal behavior towards use of detention is part of this. In the past, some of these youth would have been detained, and now they are not being. And none of us think that having youth in detention, particularly for status offenses, is a good idea. Like, it's not good for them. They wind up worse at the end of the process. They wind up with behavior that is worse. I have stories that I tell about that, but I'm really trying to not characterize behavior as being the fault of the youth or something that they can correct on their own. But I also have to face the reality of, if our caseworkers are being physically assaulted by youth, we have to report to potential foster homes the entire history of the youth. This has been heavily litigated, or not litigated, heavily written into the law in terms of what we have to provide to foster parents so that they have a full understanding of, do they have the capability to manage the behavior of a particular child. And we're talking about a small group of children with pretty severe behavioral health challenges that make them very challenging for us to provide an effective service array for. And I don't want to characterize it a whole lot further than that in terms of specifics. I'd be happy to walk through specific cases with any of you in private so that you can actually see behavior. But there's so few of these kids that if I describe a particular behavior pattern, the sample size is too small and you can figure out which kid I'm talking about. And I don't feel like that's fair to the kid. So I'm going to veer into, it's very hard to manage my language on this. I don't know how to do it well. And I hear your concern about that, Lois, and I don't want to go there, and I'm struggling with it. So I'm trying hard.
So this ties into the strategic plan for the agency that discusses wraparound services and the importance of having them. And it seems like this is an area that definitely needs to be strengthened. And if there's only a handful of children that have these issues, then it seems that there should easily be a plan in place for them. If you are saying it's just a handful and it's not widespread. I'll stop there, and because I want to give other people a chance, other board members a chance to share some comments, but then I have some other questions about staff later.
I agree with you. We should have a plan in place. We now have the Healthcare Authority has implementing the WISE wraparound intensive mental health services across the state. That's been in the last couple of years in terms of building it. Washington State is not a state that is rich in mental health resources. Historically, we've been one of the worst in the country in terms of providing adequate mental health services to adults or to children. And here is where we are seeing this. Particularly our overnight staff are not psychiatrists. If we put a kid in a clip bed, of which there are fewer than 100 in the state, they get service from psychiatrists. The legislature controls the number of those. They added, I believe, 16 2 years ago, and the Healthcare Authority, I can't remember whether it's DSHS or the Healthcare Authority is rolling them out. But hiring that staff is the challenge for that to provide that service. For many of these children, that's an appropriate response, inpatient psychiatric care. And that is not something that we are ever going to be able to provide. And I don't think you want us to build a shadow system to provide that care. We want to work with the healthcare authority to have appropriate mental health services for kids. And I agree with you, we should have a plan in place, and we are building it. The pandemic's been a little hard, I gotta say.
And I would say that it's not really a shadow system, as you just stated, if there's nothing in place. So it would be filling a gap where there are major holes right now.
Thank you, Lois and Mr. Secretary. Any other questions on the board?
Chair Dent, I was just going
Yes.
to say, and thank you, Representative Secretary Hunter, for mentioning it, that I appreciate you saying that it was on you. And then I also appreciate that you are bringing up the roles of DSHS, right? Healthcare Authority and the legislature, in that, you know, we working with children's mental health issues, and whether it's related to foster youth or just kids not in foster youth, we have a dire need for mental health services for youth, inpatient beds at hospitals, step-down services, partial hospitalization, clip beds, and we don't have that. And so while I definitely appreciate you owning that, I also, you know, want to make sure that, you know, we admit and own that we desperately need to make investments in the mental health system for youth, and that is multi-agency and multi-branch of government. So just wanted to emphasize that. I appreciate your comment to the follow-up on that question.
The reason the legislature controls the number of clip beds is because they cost $50,000 a month per kid to sustain. And so, you know, at $500,000 a year or more, $500,600,000 a year, it's expensive, and the legislature tends to control things that are that expensive. I certainly did when I was in that role, and I find I have a different perspective on it in my new role.
Thank you, Secretary Hunter.
Can I
it's been
just,
very
I'm
interesting
sorry.
discussion. Excuse me just a minute. This is going relatively slow here, and then we're going to run out of time. There's a lot of questions to be asked. So the questions that we don't get to, Secretary Hunter, I'm going to respectfully ask that you could submit some written answers to them to the board. So I think you probably have those already. But I want to move along a little bit. One more question on this topic, and then I want to move into the Dr. Wood situation. So the next question I have here is on the second page of our questions, question number 5. If any counterproductive or inappropriate child welfare practices have proliferated in the field, how would DCYF go about correcting them? What steps are in place to ensure it no longer and or does not happen to other children?
So when we got the King 5 original work, and the concern about how people talk about we provided very clear direction to our field staff that having children sleep in cars is not an accepted practice. We don't do it. At the point after you make that kind of work, then people who choose to do that are that is in the category of investigations. We are not. We can create practice standards and we can enforce them. What we can't do is create practice standards that cannot be complied with. And so we're trying to not do that. Like, I can't agree to not use hotel stays until I have placement options that, until I have an adequate set of placement options, until either everyone agrees that if a youth rejects all placement options, either we smile and say, this is your option, or you can stand out here in the parking lot all night. That's one choice, or we take the child to a hotel. Those are, so we will have to get to the point where we resolve that. I can't instruct our staff to do something that can't actually be done. I'm not excited about having children stay in the parking lot. So we are going to have to figure out a set of options that are acceptable to 16 and 17-year-olds, And for those of you who've raised 16 and 17-year-olds, that's sometimes an interesting conversation. So this is a challenging work, but we can provide instructions to staff and we can enforce it. But it has to be practical.
I understand. And so just to follow up on your answer there, what does enforcement to the staff look like?
Well, every quarter I review, I have a meeting that's on my calendar, you can go find it, that is discipline review. And we, one of the things that everyone observed when we created the agency was that there was a lot of concern about inappropriate employee investigations. And I read all the employee investigations. We have an entire unit of people that investigate employees for misbehavior, and we often fire people because they cannot or choose not to comply with practice expectations, or they do other behavior that, you know, you have 5,000 employees, people, the set of dumb things that people do is astoundingly large. We've cut the number of investigations in half because we changed the behavior of how that worked. I hope you're seeing that in the field, Charles. But we still do investigations, and we regularly fire people. We occasionally prosecute people for behavior, or we don't, but the police do. And that's particularly true in cases where we have children in custody, but there are power relationships with clients that are where things like custodial rape come up, and we're not tolerant. You're on mute.
Yeah, I lost my cursor. I'm sorry. My apologies, Mr. Secretary. So thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. I did not know all of those things. So we do have a board member who is asking for you to define what a clip bed is.
Okay. Example of a clip bed is some acronym. It's a 4-word acronym. I have no idea what it is. It's a bed, the Child Study Treatment Center, for example, which is located on the grounds of Western State, provides a number of beds. There's psychiatrists that staff it. I would urge you to go visit sometime. It's a cool place to visit. And it seems like a healing place, but it's essentially a mental hospital with inpatient beds where youth are committed to there. The doors are locked. We don't have the ability to have locked doors on any of our placements. These are kids where we have a serious concern about their health.
Thank you. That was a good answer. Appreciate that. So I'm going to move on here a little bit to the Dr. Woods situation. This happened. I want to touch as many cross-section of these questions that we have as possible, and I can see that while your answers are somewhat concise, we're not going to get to all the questions. So
not my best skill.
Yeah. So let's go up to the first section on the Dr. Woods situation. Frank Ordway, DCYF Chief of Staff, issued a formal response letter in collaboration with Seattle Children's Hospital and Mary Bridge Children's Hospital to the DCYF Oversight Board on June 2nd, 2021. The following questions are from the board in response to that letter. There's about 4 questions here, so I'll just ask one at a time, Mr. Secretary. Do you know how many cases Dr. Woods' input contributed to either the removal of children from their families or resulted in a dependency case?
We contract with Children's Hospital to provide this medical consultation service. And we use it as consulting. The decision to remove a child is made by the court, and they don't always agree with our advice on this. We get advice from MedCon. And our contract with Children's calls for consultation to come not from an individual doc, but from a consensus of doctors. So Dr. Woods could be involved in, I don't have an exact number for you of how many cases we had an input from and whether we took that advice or not. But it would be in the low hundreds. It's not we don't get medical consult on a lot of cases.
Okay, thank you. I missed Lois Martin had her hand up. You have a question, Lois?
I do. I wanted to, before we go too far into this, I had a question about the staff. Ross, Director Hunter, excuse me, had mentioned that some of the staff, that discipline does happen, go prosecuted and that type of thing. So looking at the King 5 expose for those staff that after the internal investigation, if it turns out that it is what has happened is true and children were being forced to stay in cars or sleep on floors if they did not comply with the directives given to them by the adult who were temporarily in charge of them, what will happen? What is to those staff, or I should say, is the department's position that those type of folk would then be faced with child neglect, which is what would happen to a parent or anyone else who left a child in those type of circumstances, and to ensure that they don't have the possibility of ever working with children again? Or is this simply going to be a, well, you did that, but that wasn't right, we're enforcing this policy and don't do it again situation?
Lois, the allegation here is that a caseworker sat in the car with a youth and for a long time trying to talk them into going into a placement. The allegation isn't that we said to a kid, go sleep in a car outside. We had so that's the allegation here. What I said to the ombuds, to Patrick, in his investigation is, I want him to go look at what actually happened in cases and not at angry emails that adults sent to each other and dealing with situations that they found very difficult to deal with. I know there have been times when I have vented to my wife about behavior of my children and then not done anything about it. It's like, oh, I'm so angry. And then I said something dumb and she said, oh, don't say that again. You're going to find a bunch of stuff like that. And we would prefer people not to be angry at children, but we're going to find that they're going to say dumb things. If they say dumb stuff in ways that changes other people's behavior, we will correct that behavior. When we look at actions that are being taken, we have not found any that rise to that level. And I don't think you're going to find cases in this of deliberate cruelty to children. Our discipline processes are negotiated pretty carefully. I have a lot of legal constraints, and when I walk through and doing discipline on this, we have done discipline in the past on this, but I'm not going to do discipline on a case where somebody assaults one of our caseworkers. We will look at the circumstances in cases. We're happy to get you statistics on what our discipline record looks like in terms of staff discipline, formal discipline, because that's publicly available on this. I want to be clear that when we put staff in an impossible situation, one, they will say dumb things. Mostly they have not done really horrible things. What you saw on the TV report this week was incredibly compassionate staff. You saw a woman on the body cam video who'd just been assaulted, talking about she was concerned about, the cop asked her, did she want to press charges? And she was struggling with that because she knows what happens to African-American men. this is someone who's just been attacked with someone with broken glass. That's not a scenario where we're gonna, so we'll make judgments on this. But I have to be supportive of staff in impossible situations. I also have behavioral standards that we enforce, and we will work our way through that. I don't think you are going to find me whitewashing stuff, but I'm also not going to overreact.
That answer your question, Lois?
Not completely, but we'll go on for the sake of time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the board before we move on here?
I am just struck as I listen to your response, Ross. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
With what would the department's response be to a licensed foster parent who did the same thing?
Who did what? Give me a scenario.
Had a youth in the car. The child wouldn't enter the house. So I believe one of the things in the King 5 report was that the youth was made purposely uncomfortable with air conditioning and not provided a blanket. And so from my experience being involved as a caregiver for a number of years, I would anticipate the department would come down pretty hard on that caregiver. Certainly the child would probably be moved, and there would probably be a licensing infraction. And so I'm just curious how that would work had it happened in a licensed caregiver's home.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer, and I don't want to make one up. Like, think about what would you do with your kid? Kid is angry at you and won't go into the house at night. I think there's different scenarios. Would we remove a child from a birth family who had their teenager where they could go into the house and they refused to, and you had them sit out in the car? It's like, all right, you sit in the car until you want to come in, but dinner is going to be served in an hour, right? I'm sure I've said that. I think this is a little different scenario here. And we have to figure out how do we create an opportunity. I would hope that we would not, in that particular scenario, come down hard on that. If we got a CPS report on it, we'd absolutely investigate it because we're required to do that. And I would hope we would come to a place where we have a reasonable behavioral expectation with the foster family. We would expect you to have similar behaviors. This is one of our challenges in working through this case is do our licensing inspections cause group homes to adopt rules that make teenagers not want to be in there? I'm going to give you an example of cell phones. Many of our group homes, particularly the homeless shelters, require kids to give up their phones. And the story that I've gotten about that is that they'll get a call from someone, perhaps someone involved in trafficking from outside, and it's disruptive. Or we had one story where someone had a business doing inappropriate calls on telephones and did it in the lobby, and that was particularly disruptive. But the kid's not going to go into a place where they don't have their phone. So we have to choose what set of behaviors we want to allow. And in the past, I don't know that we've made a formal decision, but that's been one of our problems. We're looking at how do we relax that.
Can you grab me a plate?
I don't have a good answer for you. I wish I did. It's not a crisp answer.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Is there any other questions at the moment for the board? Thank you. So I'm going to move on here. I do have a couple of questions I'd like to get a response from you on, Mr. Secretary. So around the Dr. Wood situation, because that is a kind of a big deal in the state as well. So I'm going to skip a couple of questions that were there, counting on the fact that you will send us some written answers. But Question 1, subquestion C, has the department or will the department have the identified cases reviewed by an independent panel outside of the existing multidisciplinary teams that use Dr. Wood's medical opinion in the decision-making to remove a child or resulted in a dependency case?
I think the short answer is no. We've disagreed with courts on cases before. The one particular case that sort of precipitated this whole situation, I reviewed an enormous mountain of material and interviewed a lot of people on it, and I came to the conclusion that we, as did Mary Bridge at the time, we supported Dr. Woods' opinion. It wasn't supported in the court. Court made a different decision, overturned our recommendation. And we don't have a lot of counterexamples to this. If all these youth have attorneys, if any youth wants to raise a concern about that case, their attorney can do that, and that's the venue that would cause that case to be reviewed. That's the appropriate way to cause an individual case to be reviewed. We don't really, I mean, there's no way for us to do that work. The attorney wants to say, hey, I'd like the court to review this case. They should do that. The courts make these decisions, not us.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So I'm just going to follow up. I think this next question will follow up on this just a little bit, but it's question number 2 in the Dr. Woods situation. Investigations into Dr. Woods' credentials reveal she was not qualified to lead Mary Bridge Children's Hospital's child abuse and intervention program due to a lack of experience in examining child abuse cases and not having completed an immersive fellowship training. Will DCYF continue to contract with the hospital with the information revealed through these investigations?
We intend to continue to contract with Seattle Children's Hospital to provide medical consultation in child abuse, potential medical abuse cases. This is cases where we think there's parents physically abusing their children, and the evidence is based on medical evidence. I'm not sure what other hospital you would like us to contract with. I think it's like one of the strongest hospitals in the Northwest quadrant of America in terms of their level of expertise. That fellowship is not required for doctors to provide medical advice in this particular case. So I disagree with your premise that Dr. Woods is not qualified to offer an opinion in these cases. So we'll continue to work with Seattle Children's and Mary Bridge to empanel groups of doctors. I'm not really the guy that picks docs in this case. I want the medical system to do that and to give advice. And then judges are the people that make decisions on whether or not that advice is good. We like to get multiple opinions on cases. These are typically very complex cases. And we want to get the value of multiple opinions before we make a recommendation to the court. And then the court reviews that evidence and makes a decision.
Okay, thank you for that, for the answer. I appreciate the answer. So I'm just going to follow up the next question. It follows up on that question. Per the King 5 article published on May 25th, 2021, Dr. Woods may return to consultation work for the panel. If this happens, will DCYF continue its contract with either organization?
Dr. Woods is not currently providing medical advice on that panel.
Okay. But would you, if she was, would you continue the relationship with him?
I don't think that scenario will occur. I don't want to go down hypotheticals about which contracts. I don't get into a fight with Seattle Children's over this issue. I'm not, that situation is not going to occur.
Understand. Thank you. I appreciate your answer. So to the board, we have 5 minutes left here in our timeline for our conversation with Secretary Hunter. We've actually had a little more of his time than he had planned on, but do we have some questions from the board members that you'd like to have, you'd like to put out there at the moment, or I can ask another question on the sheet. But I want to give everybody an opportunity to weigh in on this situation, this topic.
Will Secretary Hunter still be on?
Michelle, Representative Caldeir, you're not a board member, so I will give you an opportunity
Okay.
Later. Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Secretary, I guess you're just stuck with me for another question here. Okay, so the investigative reports regarding Dr. Wood's state that Dr. Wood's opinion was given particular weight in assessing the decision to remove a child. Can you please explain exactly how Dr. Wood's input was weighed and why it may differ from other medical experts or other members of the multidisciplinary team, if at all?
Because doctors have different opinions. This is why you get second opinions. In medical cases, someone says to you, hey, you need to have cancer treatment, perhaps you should get a second opinion. I certainly did when I got my diagnosis 10 years ago. But and so people have disagreements. That's why you want to have multiple opinions so that you can weigh them. When we're getting a medical consult, this is not a decision that to use that information. These are cases that are staffed pretty high in our organization, right? This is not a single caseworker gets to request a very rare and expensive resource. This will go up the management chain, and we'll have probably an area administrator or a regional administrator looking at the results of that because it's a much more complicated case. If we need MedCon, it means that you can't just figure it out by looking at it, right? So we weigh that using management expertise. Most of the people, all of our senior administrators have done this work for a very long time. This is not something I weigh in on, right? Because I'm not a caseworker, right? I'm not a social worker. All of you who know me know that I would be a terrible social worker. And so this is a place where people have expertise, read that, and then they make a judgment about what are they going to recommend to the court. And then the court also weighs that information and decides what decision they're going to make. But these are really complicated cases. They require high-level staffing on our side.
Understand. So I'll ask you one more question, Secretary Hunter. It's a relatively short, easy question, I think, but it's question number 5 on the Dr. Wood's page. What, if any, mental health support is the department offering the children and families who were wrongly separated due to Dr. Wood's input?
I'm going to challenge the premise of your question. So your question here is that children were wrongly removed based on input from a particular doctor in a medical consultation. Okay, so if you believe a child was wrongly removed, then that child's lawyer, and all of them have lawyers, should bring that case up to the court and challenge the removal. I don't believe that children were wrongly removed based on that input.
Okay. Well, thank you for the answer. And thank you for taking the time to come and sit before the board and answer these questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but I'd appreciate if you could send Krista your answers, the written answers you have for all of them actually, but for the ones that we didn't get to. And we do have one more question from Dr. Levy.
I was just interested in knowing what size is your consultation group when you talk about Dr. Woods being a part of a consultation group and it's more than one opinion.
Yeah.
What size are you talking about? How many people?
I think there's about 10. I don't have that exact answer in my head. It's not more than 10. And you would typically get opinions from a couple people in looking at those at any particular case. I'll bet there are cases where we just have one. But the goal is to have multiple docs. And again, we contract with Children's for the service. We don't administer the service. It's not like a service we buy case by case. We have a contract for getting advice on cases directly with Children's. And we can get you more detailed I'd get you a detailed answer on that. But I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Did that answer your question to your satisfaction, Dr. Levy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if
I'll
we're,
give you a real answer.
yeah, I mean, I think it makes some difference, right? If Dr. Woods is one of 2 people on a consultative panel, it's going to be a lot different than if she's one of 10.
I agree with you, and I will get you an answer. And I believe we have someone on this call who is taking notes about what questions I agree to answer, and who will write that question down, and I'll make sure to get you a detailed answer on that.
And Director Hunter, this is Lois. As a follow-up to that, I'm curious as to the racial breakdown of the children who are impacted by these stays, whether it's in a car or in the office, as well as what the department is doing to ensure that there is a diverse group of practitioners, health practitioners that make up these panels that are coming up with the decisions for these children, and what the department's doing to ensure that it is diverse, whether it's geographically and racially.
Two different questions about different topics.
Yes, it is 2 different questions.
So the MedCon, I don't know the answer. We can go find out. I mean, I'll have to ask because we don't track it for the provider in that particular scenario. For the children with placement exceptions, we certainly have that information, and we can share it with you. I can share it with you privately in detail, and the sample size is small enough that I probably can't publish the data because we wind up having ends in some of the cells on the chart smaller than 10, and it's too likely to identify individual children. So you as a member of the Oversight Board can see that data, but I can't publish it with very small numbers. But we can get you that information. And again, if our note taker can remind me that I've promised to answer that question, I'll get it to you. Or Krista, if you can, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Secretary Hunter, and thank you for being here this morning and answering the questions. We appreciate your time. We know it's valuable, and I'm sure that there'll be in the near future, we'll have more questions for you, and hopefully we can continue to find a solution to some of these serious issues. So thank you again.
It's sort of your role in the world to have questions for me. So
that's right.
I'm happy to come and respond. And we'd like to tell you some of the success stories too, but I'm happy to also have you come and yell at me about stuff too. So
that's why I call you all the time.
That's why I answer the phone. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much.
So, now we'll move on here to Patrick Dowd, who is the director of the Office of Family and Children's Ombuds, and he has an investigative briefing for us here. So, Mr. Dowd, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Office of the Family and Children's ongoing work on the issues related to placement exceptions, hotel stays, and office stays. Again, my name is Patrick Dowd. I'm director of the Office of the Family and Children's Ombuds. And let me pull up a brief PowerPoint and share that. Let's see. Is that showing on your screen?
No, it's not on my screen. Do we have to, Nicholas, do we have to allow him to share the screen?
Should be able to, but I can also, I have it up if,
Okay. Well, let's see. How's that?
That looks good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for the delay. Okay, so basically our office has had a open systemic investigation on placement exceptions for, the last 6 years. We first started tracking incidents of children staying in hotels and offices due to a lack of a appropriate license placement in 2015. And at that time, I was alarmed because there were 120 placement exceptions. Unfortunately, that number has continued to grow. And last year, in our 2020 reporting year, there were nearly 1,863 placement exceptions. Now that isn't individual children. I think there were roughly 225 individual children that experienced placement exceptions. So when I refer to a placement exception, that is an incident of a child spending the night in a hotel or a office. And a quick caveat, placement exceptions do not include night-to-night foster care placements where a child goes to a foster home at say 7 or 8 o'clock at night, caseworker picks up the child at 7 o'clock in the morning and returns to the office. Those are equally as transient or unstable as hotel or offices, but they are not included in placement exceptions because technically they are a licensed placement. So as this year, and again, I think that the data are kind of a dashboard for month-to-month placement exceptions was provided in the material to you. And we're on pace to exceed last year's total of over 1,800 placement exceptions. So far, there have been 223 children who stay in a hotel or DCYF office. 70 children spent 6 or more nights in a placement exception. In a way, this is a positive in that there's a relatively small number of children that are making up the majority of the placement exceptions. Over 90% of the placement exceptions occur in Region 4 and in Region 6. My assumption is that doesn't mean that everything is fine in the rest of the state, and the other regions have adequate placement resources, but rather the other regions may be relying on night-to-night placements rather than hotel and office stays. Another issue. Go ahead.
Patrick, this is Representative Dent. Your slides don't appear to be advancing. We're still on the same, your introductory slide here.
All right.
And second, if you could maybe give us a little bit of an overview on the different regions. Not everybody may not know the.
Okay, so Region 1 is Spokane and Eastern Washington. Region 2 is Central Washington. Region 3 would be kind of the I-5 corridor north of King County. Region 4 is King County. Region 5 is Pierce County and Kitsap County. And Region 6 would be Southwest Washington and up through the Olympic Peninsula. So now, are you able to view this kind of the slide that's currently on the screen, or is it?
The slide I see is your introductory slide, DCYF Oversight Board meeting, July 15th. So.
All right, so apparently I'm not able to advance the slides, and I'm not sure why.
Nicholas, do you have any control over that?
Yeah, hey Patrick, this is Nicholas. If you want to stop sharing screen, I can share mine.
Okay.
And move forward for you.
Okay, let's try that. Okay, I stopped sharing my screen. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, and this slide shows the kind of steady increase of placement exceptions, over the years. And despite legislative efforts as well as OFCO's ongoing reporting of this issue and initiatives by the department, those have proven to be unsuccessful in addressing this issue. And next slide. All right, and this shows that, a quick comment here is the disparity in the way Region 4 and Region 6 are addressing this issue. Region 4 relies primarily on hotel stays, where at least to date, Region 6 has been relying primarily on offices as emergency placements for youth. I'm not sure what's driving that. Last year when we followed up with Region 6 on this, they were relying on offices in part to respond to the COVID pandemic. And they were setting up offices and utilizing visitation rooms as individual rooms for children where they could be isolated overnight, clean the next day, et cetera, rather than having several children in one hotel room with multiple staff. It could also be, I think, a reflection of the availability of hotels in more rural areas than in the King County area. But this could be challenging for Region 6 in light of the federal court order that prohibits the department, barring emergent circumstances, from utilizing offices as a placement exception. Next slide, please. So this slide is based from our last year report, and this underscores that a relatively small number of children make up the majority of the placement exception. So if you look at the last three columns, these are children that spent either 6 to 9, the middle column, 10 to 19, or 20 or more nights in a placement exception. And the number on top of the column is how many children are we talking about? So we have, about 70 children who kind of made up or represent those very difficult to place children and are really driving these numbers. To me, this speaks to, if we can address the needs of these 70 children, then we could really make a significant impact on eliminating placement exceptions. Also, when you think there are, I think around 7,000 or 7,500 children in state care, this is a small fraction of the overall number of children that are in state care, and we should be able to develop appropriate resources to meet their needs. Next slide, please. So this, each year we try to look at what is the race and ethnicity of the children. And I'm not a statistician. I don't know if the numbers, we have sufficient numbers when we talk about 225 children that are experiencing placement exceptions, if that's statistically significant, and what conclusions can be drawn from that. But I will say, when we look at that every year, it seems that Black and African American children experience placement exceptions at a higher rate of their population in out-of-home care, as well as their reflection of the overall population in Washington State. So this is another area of disproportionality, in my view, within our child welfare system. I want to get back to another point, and this follows up on a comment from board member Lois Martin. As Secretary Hunter commented, when we talk about these 70 children or 80 children that make up the majority of placement exceptions, we look at these individual cases and find that these are children with significant mental health issues, developmental disabilities, suicidal ideation, self-harming behavior, maybe a history of running or substance abuse, might be physically aggressive, et cetera, which make them difficult to place. And I agree with Ms. Martin's comment that rather than vilify or blame the child, we need to, as a system, understand that children, all sorts of children with all types of needs are going to come into the state child welfare system and require placement. And it's our obligation to develop those placement and services that can meet their needs. And unfortunately, we have been ill-equipped to provide placement needs for a relatively small number of children. Similarly, as noted in the King 5 stories, after-hours staff who are responsible for supervising placement exceptions are generally inexperienced, they're younger workers, they lack training to care for children during these placement exceptions, and as a result, they feel ill-equipped and unsupported to provide adequate supervision during the placement exceptions. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to, as when I began, I said over the last 6 years, OFCO has been conducting unfortunately, a systemic investigation into placement exceptions and reporting out on our findings. Previously, we interviewed area administrators in various regions and offices to get their input as to how this is impacting case management and staff and kind of the challenges they face in meeting placement needs for these children in emergent situations. In response to the King 5 story, we are now kind of expanding our systemic investigation to include interviews of after-hour workers and children and youth that are experiencing multiple placement exceptions, as well as reviewing case records from individual cases. I notified Secretary Hunter as well as upper administration with the department of our plan to move forward to investigate this into more detail. As Secretary Hunter described, I do have the full support of DCYF management. I've notified regional administrators that we are contacting caseworkers and after-hours staff to conduct interviews. By design, we are not identifying either specific caseworkers or individual children that we intend to interview or have interviewed to ideally to preserve the integrity of our process, as well as to protect the confidentiality of after-hours workers as well as children and youth. So to do that, we have contacted after-hours workers and staff directly to set up interviews. As far as children and youth, we are contacting their attorneys, and their attorneys have assisted in facilitating our interviews with the children. The interview questions focus on the topics that are described in this slide. Child and staff safety, meeting the children's basic needs, and that would include whether or not basic needs have been withheld in a punitive manner or to gain a child's compliance, either to modify behavior or accept a placement, et cetera. We have questions around transportation, and that also would include the use of vehicles and how long children are staying in vehicles. In previous investigations, one thing we found around the issue of whether or not children are sleeping and are spending the night in vehicles, we get a different narratives. So the child will describe, I spent the night in the vehicle. When we investigate that with the department, the narrative we get from the department is a little different, that the child was transported to a available placement. The child refused the placement. Caseworker and child remained outside the placement, trying to get the child to change his or her mind, kind of, et cetera. So, again, from the child's perspective, I spent the night in this vehicle. The department's perspective is, no, the vehicle was not used as a placement, but rather it was part of the transportation to an available placement. So anyway, we're trying to get more information around that issue. Behavioral management, both from the staff's perspective as well as the child's and youth, and training and support. We've designed our questions in a way to keep them as open-ended as possible, because we really want to elicit a kind of objective perspective from the child or caseworker. And I anticipate that our interviews and case records reviews will be included in our annual report that will be released this November. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions.
And Dr. Levy has a question.
Yes, I do. Both you and Secretary Hunter have referred sort of anecdotally that there are a high percentage of children with developmental disabilities as well as mental health in this kind of group of 70 that you've identified. And while we do want to protect, obviously, children's privacy, I think it would be very helpful to know the breakdown of what we're actually seeing, because I think that influences what potential steps we could take to find more adequate placements for children. So for example, if we have 70% of these kids are on the autism spectrum, that speaks to me as a developmentalist on how that would potentially kind of move where we want to move our supports, whether we want to build more SIBS waivers for the DDA program, et cetera. So I would like to see that information presented to our oversight board.
So, and our office has done not in a I think a statistically kind of manner, but one thing we did is we did look at some of these harder to place youth and published in our annual report and looked at what percent based on their kind of case records were documented as having kind of mental health diagnosis or developmental disabilities, et cetera, as well as where they eventually were placed. And so how many eventually were placed in a clip bed for long-term psychiatric care, or how many were placed in a behavioral rehabilitative services, therapeutic, foster home, or a group care facility. So, and I can go back in our annual report and send that to Krista. But I think you're correct that by identifying that, and probably in a lot more depth and detail that our office is able to do, will help define where do we need to build up our resources to address this issue.
Thank you, Patrick. Senator Warnick has a question.
Thank you, Representative Dent, and thank you, Patrick. This presentation answers a lot of my questions that I was thinking about during the Secretary's presentation. During your interviews, and I'm really glad to hear that this is all very confidential, both from a staff person and the children's perspective, that it is very confidential. Do you see, I'm hearing rumors of staff being afraid of retaliation if they answer questions truthfully. Do you see any, during your interviews, any kind of fear that they're not real sure about answering those questions and given the different circumstances? And that could be the children too, so.
That is a good question, and one that we deal with, I think, on a daily basis from individuals that contact our office, whether it's a foster parent or a biological parent or a relative caregiver. It's not uncommon that they say, you know, I would have contacted your office earlier, but I was afraid that there would be kind of ramifications from the department if they knew I filed a complaint. That is something that we are sensitive to. And one kind of question that I have is we've identified specific after hours caseworkers based on which ones have dealt with this issue kind of the most. And we want to hear from them. But we can't force them to respond to our request for an interview. And the ones that do might be the ones that have less of a concern of retaliation. But I think it's certainly possible that some caseworkers might not respond at all, or might respond and say, look, I just don't want to participate in an interview with your office. And we can't force them to do that. And that ostensibly could be because they think there could be some ramifications for them. As far as youth, I did get an inquiry from an attorney who was concerned that our questions might be in a manner that would elicit a response from a child or youth that would have some sort of even criminal liability, you know, for the youth regarding their behavior during a placement exception or, and again, I told the attorney that our focus is not on the youth's conduct at all, but rather on what they experienced during a hotel or an office stay. And also that when we report out this information, we will maintain confidentiality and we will not be describing incidences in a manner that would identify a caseworker or a child.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Do we have any further questions from any members of the board for Patrick? I thought I saw, Annie, I thought I saw your hand up. Annie Blacklights. Oh, Ben DeHaan, he has a question. Ben?
Hi, Patrick. Ben DeHaan here. This certainly isn't a new issue, right? I mean, you've been looking at it for 6 years. In my experience, I've wrestled with this in a number of different states as a child welfare administrator. It really isn't a new phenomenon. Do you have any ideas about why it is that we have not been successful in making any progress in this regard? Or have you noticed anything changing in the needs of the children in the state? Why is it that we are all so frustrated with still seeing this after all of these years? You mentioned that there have been some initiatives within, I assume, the old Children's Administration. The legislature's acted, of course. Is there something that we're overlooking and something that should characterize a new approach to this problem?
So this is, I guess, anecdotal and kind of my personal views that could be completely inaccurate. But I look at different factors that have occurred and placement resources such as Ryder, for example, that several years ago determined, look, we cannot kind of afford to continue to take children from the foster care system. And that has put a cramp in available resources, and I don't think we've recovered from that. I think there's also, again, I want to underscore kind of the appropriate change in our juvenile justice system of not using detention for children that are involved in the juvenile justice system. I question whether county juvenile justice systems have developed resources to adequately support children in their community and in their home as an alternative. And I think sometimes these children are filtering into the child welfare system, as Secretary Hunter described, even though there are not allegations of abuse or neglect. Similarly, children that come into the system because of mental health or developmental disabilities issues, absent allegations of abuse or neglect, but the parent is no longer able to maintain the child in the home. All of these different factors seem to have kind of increased the pressure on I think, limited resources within our continuum of care.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Lois Martin has a question.
Thank you, Representative Dent. Patrick, I have a question. I'm assuming that you and members of your staff are mandatory reporters. If during your investigation you see a pattern of using punitive methods of, if you see a pattern of caseworkers responding punitively to these youth, what will your agency do? And also, especially since the report is not due until December.
So there are two kind of things. One is, if in the course of our investigation, we find that a caseworker has engaged in criminal conduct, or not even find, but if we find evidence that a caseworker is engaged in criminal conduct, then we would refer that to the department and to the Washington State Patrol. We are mandated reporters, and if we find that a caregiver has engaged in conduct that meets the legal definition of child abuse or neglect, then we would be required to report that to Child Protective Services.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. All right, we have time for one more question. Annie?
Thank you so much, Representative Dent. Hi, Patrick. Really concerned about the developmental disabilities intersection and wondering, we just recently did a report card at Mockingbird, and it was very hard for us to interview young people with developmental disabilities, given our limited skill sets. And I know that sometimes it requires a very specific skill set to be able to walk with those children and young people through these kinds of questions. Are you all able to do that in the context of this investigation? And then I would just want to thank my colleague Diane for asking for the numbers, because I do think it is very important, and sorry for my big mouth dog.
Annie, that's a great question. And frankly, I think we will have to address, any barriers with our interviews with children and youth on a case-by-case basis. To be honest with you, neither myself nor any of my staff have specific expertise as far as effective communication with children with developmental disabilities or cognitive impairment or verbal impairment. So it could be, I'm thinking about and this is not a developmental disability, but for example, a child or youth that use American Sign Language and having an interpreter for something like that. So I think we will have to kind of deal with that as it comes up, but that's a great question.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you for your time today and your presentation and answering some of these very difficult questions. I truly appreciate it. I'm quite certain we'll have you back again real soon as we continue this discussion.
Thank you.
We ran over time a little bit, but I thought the discussion we were having with Patrick was very, very valuable. So basically, we're into the discussion of potential actions and next steps. So I think in lieu of that, at the moment, let's take
Representative Dent, it
Yes.
looks like Senator Darnell is trying to get in before we close out. I think we have a couple more minutes.
Senator.
Thank you so much. Patrick, thank you for your report. I think it is important for us to sort of have that sense of there's nothing new under the sun here that Ben was talking about, but we're certainly seeing greater numbers. And you mentioned, and others have sort of glanced through the impact of 5290, which was the bill to end the incarceration of children for status offenses. And this issue of a child being incorrigible is, quite frankly, part of the law. That was part of the allowance for children to be placed by the court in detention, was that their parent reported that they were incorrigible. So Ross was talking, for instance, about there not being a finding or an allegation even of child abuse, but that the parents have had enough, or they feel inadequate, or these kinds of issues. And so we have, we've weathered a lot of concern during the course of the 5 years we were discussing that bill that was raised by the Superior Court, because as Ross was I don't want us to forget that the court is the group making the actions here in many cases, and that the court was determining that a child should be in detention. The rollout or the extended time period that we had defined in 5290 for disallowing the court to make that kind of decision goes through this coming July 1st, so almost a full year from now. And it is that category of children who are found by the court to be at risk to themselves or others, including parents, or becoming or continuing to be used in sexually, commercially exploited reasons. But I have seen that the court during COVID has not referred these children into detention, even though legally under 5290, they could do that. And so I don't know whether your report interfaces at all with the court database, in terms of how the court is driving those admission decisions, but certainly without, and it could be sort of a we told you so kind of moment, but very few children were detained during the entire pandemic so far, for status offenses. And so we knew from an advocacy side that the court could do less of that referral into the detention services, but they still can do it for another 6 months as we try to weather the storms of the pandemic and the implementation of community-based strategies to address these issues. But it seems hard for us to make decisions when we're just looking at DCYF and not looking at those outside influences over which the department has no control. And I wonder if that has entered into your analysis or reporting, about maybe Carl McCurley's data over at the Office of Court Research and how 5290 is being implemented around the state, how that might be influencing the number of these kids who are, you know, by those archaic terms, incorrigible. They could have mental health problems. They could be substance using. They could be traumatized and very angry and acting out. So there's all kinds of reasons for incorrigible children. But I wonder if you've done any more interface with the courts.
Not direct interface with the courts, and this is more kind of anecdotal, just from going through case records in individual cases. But I do see situations where I think, well, 5 years ago or so, the department would have, or this child would have been picked up on a run report and held in detention until there's a review hearing. And maybe the court would have even imposed sanctions for contempt for violating a court order to remain in placement, for example. And that I don't see occurring at all. I've also seen situations where there is a crisis situation with a parent dealing with a child in the home that is assaultive, and law enforcement is called, and mental health is involved, and CPS is called, and law enforcement responds that they won't intervene and take the child to detention because the child would not be held. So I see it on kind of different levels of it, not of situations, not even getting in front of a court where a judge or commissioner would be making a decision on whether or not to temporarily detain a child.
But we have to imagine that 7 years ago, when we were detaining 2,760 kids in an annual period of time, and now we are talking about 223 children that are in that hard to serve placement exemptions category. I can't help but think there's a correlation there. And I really think what we should be looking for here is how this data can help us to encourage the department through science or through resources for specific kinds of interventions, whatever it might be, rather than feeling punitive towards the department. We ought to be saying, hey, listen, we brought those numbers down by over 2,000 kids being detained, you know? And so we have to think that, of course, there will be exceptions to everybody feeling fine about that and everybody having a good experience about that. But we have to figure out what those interventions should be. And if they're in particular counties, should we be driving money out, services out in a different way? I personally don't feel punitive towards the department at all. I'm trying to hear, though, what are the resources that are needed? How much do they cost? Where should we deploy them? And how can we track that investment rather than feeling angry towards the department for the fact that we should have anticipated at least 200 of these children would be challenging to work with.
And quickly, I would comment, I don't think it's 223 that are challenging or hard to place. I think it's more like, 70 or 80. And that there are some that they're picked up at like 8 or 9, 10 o'clock at night, and the department's not able to contact a relative, and they're in a hotel overnight, and then the next day they're placed with grandparents, for example. So again, I think it's even a smaller number of children that we need to develop resources for.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for that answer, and thank you, Senator Arneal. I appreciate that. So we're at the break time now. Let's take a break. We'll reconvene. We're going to go just a little bit longer than, we're going to go till 12:15 on our break, and we'll come back to public comment. And I'd like to remind everyone this is an open public meeting, and if you would like to have have a comment, then you can go into the chat box and enter your name and ask Nicholas, or you could email Nicholas, and all that information is inside the chat box. So we'll see everyone in approximately 10 minutes. So thank you.
Hey, Patrick, are you still on? Oh, I think you're muted.
Now I am. I was muted, sorry.
So is it possible, because I was going to give you a call, but is it possible for you to find out how many of these hard to place kids were in BRS but got kicked out of BRS at one point?
We might be able to do that.
And even for the kids that are going night to night, because I do a lot of the night to night ones. And like one kiddo just got picked up because I have good relationships with the after hours people, and I'm already at capacity, but they said we don't want to do a hospital stay, yada yada. And kid was telling me that she was in a clip bed, or not clip bed, but a BRS home, and her behavior got better, so she got kicked out of it and has been going night to night ever since. And I've heard that from multiple kids.
Yeah.
So
that, I think we'd have to kind of do a hand count on that, but that is that's something that we've noted before, that some of these children were sometimes they were quote kicked out because of non-compliance from the therapeutic BRS foster home or group care facility, and others it was determined, they've completed our program, they're ready to step down to a less restrictive placement, and they do, and then that's not successful for kind of whatever reason.
Yeah, because I think that there's a certain type of person that can handle snotty teenagers, and I'm one of them. And I've found that sometimes they'll place them with somebody who maybe would do better with a cute younger child, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily the teenager.
Patrick, sorry, this is Stacia. I just want to caution you that we're on break.
Okay.
And so, and the conversation that you were having is coming across the Zoom call, and
I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm so sorry.
No, it's so much trickier, right? In this situation. And I just have concerns that the public thinks we're on break, so they may not be.
Okay. I'll talk. Yeah. Well, Patrick answered my question. I thought, because a lot of times in the legislature, when we go on break, nobody can see, and I thought it was just us two. So.
No, I just wanted to let you know, and I'm sorry it took me forever to find my unmute button, so I apologize for not jumping in sooner.
Okay.
But if you guys could, either offline or.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No problem. That's what I'm here for.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hey, I'll just chime in and say, this is Annie, Michelle. I think when we come back from break and you do public comment, bring that back up. I think it's very important.
Okay. Thank you, Annie.
No, thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. As promised, it's 12:15 and we'll bring the board back into session here. And we're going to move into the public comment period. And the public comment period, my co-chair, Sharonda, will lead the public comment. So I'll turn the meeting over to Sharonda. Sharonda?
Thank you so much, Representative Dent. I'm going to go ahead and start going through the list. I want to once again just remind everyone that this is an open public meeting. And we're going to go ahead and start off with Victoria Vang.
Hello. Excuse me if I'm a little nervous. So I'm here today to just advocate for the parents who can be here, some parents who can be here today who want you all to know what's going on and do not want to be forgotten about. And what I'm referring to are the false allegations of child abuse. I'm a community member and a parent myself, and this is specifically, a little bit has to do with Dr. Woods, but overall, this is a nationwide problem and extends beyond just Washington State. I wrote what I wanted to say down, but I just want to say that Texas and Arkansas have already really tried to remedy some of the issues that pop up when it comes to diagnosing child abuse. But anyways, so what I found is alarming. Specifically, it's revealing to us the flaws of a system that does not protect the rights of innocent families and parents, and those alleging abuse, who are medical professionals, obviously will never retract their allegations, even when presented with evidence of potential medical concerns that right now science may not have an explanation for. And so something needs to be done, because healthy, happy children are being ripped from their parents, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while their child who they emitted into the, emergency room, it all happens at once. All the stories are very similar. And so this is happening because of the opinions of doctors who've been trained specifically to look for abuse and not specific diseases or illnesses or any kind of specialization that could potentially warrant maybe a disease that would mimic abuse. And there are studies out there that support this. And and this isn't to diminish what they do, because I myself have worked in a residential program for foster youth who have been institutionalized due to a lot of the issues that you all here are talking about today. I've worked with parents and families. I've always been an advocate for families. And this is just alarming to see, to have been on the other side of supporting family and youth rights, and then to also kind of see from the family perspective of potentially the different types of circumstances that are happening. So what I'm saying is that there's got to be a better way to protect innocent families, to minimize the harm that's being done. Because, when abuse is diagnosed, other children in the family are taken right away, right? So I believe Mr. Hunter had mentioned that, well, it's up to the courts whether or not they want to remove the child. But in the case of, many of these families, they are having their children removed right away, not even understanding what's going on, right? And not even having the opportunity to seek that second opinion, as he mentioned that there would be, and and the burden of proof falls on the parents. And then, the stress and the mental, just the distress, the family goes into crisis. So we're talking about healthy families that go into crisis because of just their life being turned upside down. And so one issue that I saw right away there was, well, when a child is removed, there's about 72 hours before the court can convene to see if there needs to be shelter care, things like that. But in the meantime, as the parents are trying to seek a second opinion, they're in either shelter care for many, many months, or even in dependency, only to have it dismissed later on because it's been discovered that, oh, this child may potentially have some sort of medical illness or whatever that have caused kind of this big snowball to happen. So it does cause long-term issues in terms of trauma. These children, they come back home, they used to be very happy and healthy, and they come back traumatized, angry, bitter, unrelenting, to why did mom and dad abandon us? Because they don't understand, and these people who took them are telling them that they're their friends. So it's and then these parents, they're once very trusting and understanding citizens of this country, only to have been betrayed by these government agencies and bodies which is supposed to help them. And they've become angry, bitter, and it is often you'll see, a quote unquote CPS parent very angry about the situation. And the consequences of misdiagnosis of child abuse doesn't just stop where separation and reunification / termination even starts. It can even potentially prolong or even prevent children who may actually have a medical condition from receiving the appropriate treatment that they need, which can be dangerous, especially if it is life-threatening or can cause permanent damage. A misdiagnosis prolongs a correct diagnosis, and it prolongs treatment. And it gives, and then it puts out false statistics, about why children are being removed from hospitals. And sometimes you see it on the news and you just question, well, how much of those, have they really looked into? And I just want to note that parents who get their kids back, who are, specifically we're talking about these medical abuse or medical cases, is, they're considered lucky, because some parents, they never see their kids again. Some, they oftentimes the department may go straight to TPR, terminating their rights, and sometimes their children will get adopted out to their family or even strangers, and they never get to see their kids again. And these innocent families are parents that are nurses, doctors, business owners, military parents, and parents work part-time, stay-at-home parents, and even I found a foster parent. And so the moment a family gets involved with CPS, they bear the scarlet letter, right? There is an unconscious bias, or some people may even explicitly show this bias of parents involved with CPS. There must be something wrong with them. Otherwise, why would CPS be involved? And oftentimes parents can't afford the medical expertise that is required to prove their innocence. And then also because of this scarlet letter that they now carry, some experts may become reluctant, because oftentimes these cases now have criminal investigations involved. And so it just makes it very difficult for parents to seek the truth or bring light to the truth. And not only is there, kind of like a strange shame attached to this, but there's also a lot of anger and even fear, because now if a parent doesn't have money, there's no winning. And if there's no winning, then how are innocent parents going to bargain with what they have for their child to come back? And really, the pattern here it looks like is throwing away their cry of innocence, saying that, something happened so that CPS will give their child back, and because of this, I feel like it causes kind of like a blur. One, we will never know for sure how many innocent parents there are. And two, how now that they have to live in fear of those false allegations, now they have to live with those false allegations and because now they have a history, right? They have a record. And if I have to be a little bit more clear on what I mean, it's just that fear of how easy it is for you to bring your child to the hospital and to have the doctor tell other colleagues and doctors and detectives, everybody, they're guilty of abuse. And I'm sorry, but this is rooted in somewhat of a, after that, everything is kind of just bias, all the decisions that are made, because It is complicated, but a lot of the decisions that are made are based on the bias of these people. And the system fails to be dynamic and grow as society changes and grows, but we need to change that. Something needs to be put in place. These families, all they ask for is accountability for the pain and suffering they're put through. And it's one of the biggest betrayals of our time. So while I don't know what the solution is, I'll continue to keep asking questions, and I'll come and, just try and do what I've always done, is advocate for parents' rights. And if it's not a part of the public health crisis in the realm of family and child health and wellness across the nation, I will guarantee you that it will be. The families that are seeking for help are growing. And yes, thank you for listening. I wrote notes about what Mr. Hunter said, but I'm not going to do it because it was a bunch of thoughts. And thank you for your time, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing all of that. You offered so much in your statement. I also want to just remind everyone, or not even remind because I never said it, could we limit our comments to 5 minutes moving forward? And I'm going to now ask Erica Halleck, if you would share. Erica, we cannot hear you. No. Sometimes on your microphone on the Zoom, it says microphone, same system. Maybe you could switch. No. I'm going to bypass you for a moment, and while you get that figured out, and then we'll move over to Lori Lippold.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? All right. Thank you all very much. I will not take 5 minutes. I'll be brief. I want to just, first of all, thank the individual who just spoke. I'm always very appreciative of hearing from people who are directly involved and are working with others who are directly involved in the system. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to just make a couple of comments about the issue you were talking about. First was Secretary Hunter, and that's the hotel stays, office stays, et cetera. And I hate to always do this, but going back historically, this is not a new issue. And what I am just hoping and keeping my fingers crossed and trying to remain optimistic is that this time there really are not only some short-term, quote, fixes to deal with the immediate problem of saying, okay, right now we need X number of beds to deal with the, I can't remember, Patrick, what number you gave, 80 some who are really in the category of, quote, hard to place, but that we do that because a legislative session will be coming up and there is an opportunity to act and hopefully get resources, et cetera, but really look at this over the course of a year or something. Every time, I mean, we saw this in Brom, that office stays were prohibited. The court oversaw that for a while. And then, so maybe it worked. Okay, great. We're not seeing many youth placed in offices or overnighting in offices or wherever. But at this point in time, then we're kind of back to where we were. And I think we just need to look at that continuum of care at whatever point you want to start, whether it is the contact with CPS or the first removal or first thought about removal, and then all the way to CLIP or other inpatient kind of care. There's a lot. I participated years ago in the creation of the 4 levels of family foster care. So the department then created a 4-level system for family foster care. And we had BRS, but there was never anything in between that really was part of a system. That it would just be an opportunity in my mind to take a look at this, go with the continuum, really address the longstanding issues. Hopefully there won't be many youth who are in this, that we can be providing a lot of good quality behavioral health services, et cetera. But this is something that has come up over time. The question I have, and I can follow up with DCYF about, is who is actually participating? Are parents involved in the stakeholder process? Are providers involved, caregivers, et cetera? Because I think to really have a comprehensive solution and one that deals with the continuum, it needs to be a pretty broad and rich stakeholder process. So thank you very much. And if Erica has not been let in yet, if somebody can let her in, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Lori. I appreciate that. We've got Erica back. Let's see if we've got some sound. Erica?
Is this better?
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, I apologize.
Okay,
You'd think after all this time we'd have it down, but yet we have these problems. So at any rate, apologies. Erica Halleck, representing the Family Impact Network, or commonly known as FIN. And FIN is the network administrator for combined in-home services and family time, which is parent-child visitation in regions 1 and 2. I just wanted to flag for this oversight board an issue that I think is really becoming increasingly important. And that has to do with reimbursement for family time providers. Like so many human services and health services, we have severely under-resourced system. And in this case, it's impacting the ability for families to have consistent and regular visits. So back during the Great Recession in the late 2000s, there was a policy, not a policy decision, a fiscal decision made to limit some of the reimbursement for those providers that facilitate visits between children and out-of-home placement and their parents. One of those key decisions was limiting travel reimbursement for mileage until 60 miles have been driven. And that has had a significant impact on the providers, many of whom are very small mom and pop organizations statewide, and their financial ability to continue to provide this important service. And with the passage of House Bill 1194, which is a great policy that people are very supportive of the policy, there is increasing concern about the fragility of our provider network due to low reimbursement rates. So in short, it's past time to address reimbursement for our family time providers. They provide a vital service toward that important family reunification. And I just wanted to make sure it was highlighted to this group. And thank you for your time. And again, apologies for my issues with my computer.
Thank you so much, Erica. Next, I have Megan Carter.
Yes, I am here. Hang on one second. Okay. Thank you to the Oversight Board for continuing to look into the issues surrounding Dr. Woods. I just had a few comments that I wanted to make. Our family was impacted by Dr. Woods' erroneous statements, and my children were removed for 414 days. After a lengthy trial, all the allegations against me were dismissed. The judge in our case issued a 26-page finding of facts, which some of you may have read. We participated in a joint investigation with King 5 and NBC News with the hope that we could prevent this from occurring to other families. Dr. Woods is no longer at Mary Bridge, but it does not appear that she has otherwise been held accountable for her actions. Mr. Hunter provided you the typical canned answers about how children are removed. I would like the board to know that his answer was very misleading. He stated that doctors do not order that children are removed. While this may be logistically true, it is oversimplified. When there is an order to remove a child in response to medical findings or concerns, judges rely solely on the medical opinion provided to them. There's no opportunity to present an opposing opinion, and the order is granted. Once that is done, a process begins that cannot be stopped. In our case, we had medical documentation proving the allegations from Dr. Woods to be untrue from the beginning. Despite having that documentation, the process moved forward, and Dr. Woods' opinion was viewed as fact. There was no consultation with any other provider, despite her initial claims otherwise. The fact that a child can be removed from a loving family based solely on a Word document typed up by a medical provider like Dr. Woods should be extremely concerning to this oversight board. Mr. Hunter also stated that he disagreed with Judge Amini's opinion regarding our case. I would like the board to read her dismissal and review her statement of facts. These are not her opinions. It is a lengthy list of facts that were available the entire time our case was going on, the entire time I was separated from my children. Both DCYF and Dr. Woods refused to review the medical records that they had access to throughout the case. Had they reviewed these records, they would have seen the discrepancies and inaccuracies in Dr. Woods' initial opinion. They were very, very clear. Mr. Hunter states that he doesn't believe that children were wrongly removed due to Dr. Woods. It is a fact that my children were. The only trauma that has ever existed in their lives is from the period of time where the department was involved. This was caused by false reporting by Dr. Woods and accepted and used by DCYF. Without any accountability, this will continue to occur even with Dr. Woods gone. The issue is DCYF relying on an opinion of a child abuse pediatrician solely. I do not understand Mr. Hunter's comments about the child's lawyer being able to ask for a review of the case afterwards. This may be applicable in cases where dependency is established, but in a case like ours where it was dismissed, I'm not sure what kind of review we would have asked for. The court determined that the allegations were blatantly false and also that Dr. Woods lied under oath, but there is no recourse there. The impact to my family does not just evaporate because the judge finally listened to the facts and acted accordingly. We are forever grateful that Judge Amini listened to the facts in our case and asked Dr. Woods and DCYF to back up their allegations, but that doesn't just take away what happened to us. Dr. Levy asked him how many doctors are on this MedCon team. It's important for the board to understand that this group has absolutely no oversight whatsoever. Each case is different. Some may be decided based on a singular opinion like ours was, and other cases may be presented at a weekly meeting of this group and move forward from there. Either way, the group depends on what is presented in that meeting to them and not on their own independent review. This does not provide any oversight at all. So those were my comments in response to Mr. Hunter's information he provided today. And I'm happy to answer any questions or talk to anybody outside of this meeting as well.
Thank you, Megan, for sharing all of that and sharing parts of your story with us. That was a lot. We're going to go ahead and move over to Taylor.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, my name's Taylor. I'm a King 5 investigative reporter, and I've reported on both of the issues discussed here today, Dr. Woods and the after-hours treatment of foster youth. So thanks for taking my comment. I want to point out a few things related to the Dr. Woods case that weren't mentioned earlier in the discussion. There was talk about how there's second opinions and multiple people reviewed these cases, but my coworker and I reviewed 4 cases where Dr. Woods accused parents of abusing their children. In several of those cases, other medical providers who weighed in determined that there were other medical explanations for the child's injuries. There was contradictory evidence that maybe these parents didn't abuse their kids. But in the cases that we reported on, Dr. Woods' opinion was given, the most weight, and that, I'm not sure where those other, with all this other explanations, it didn't seem like sometimes those were considered in the cases. The other thing I want to point out is that as we were reviewing these records, there were statements made in these medical consultations where Dr. Woods commented on things that were outside of her scope as a doctor, statements that weren't based in medical fact, but that were based on the opinion of a parent, parenting skills, or a parent's lack of reaction. And in some of these cases, she had never met the parents. So those are 2 of the things that stood out to me as kind of gaps in the system that, as Megan pointed out, there isn't tons of oversight. These doctors are given, they have a lot of weight in our state. And so I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of those things. And I'd also like to know what the Oversight Board plans to do for next steps when it comes to the topic of Dr. Woods and this larger issue, because it's not, I've heard from parents, not just about this doctor, but this system in our state.
Thank you, Taylor, for your comments and clarification. To your question, there is a portion of the meeting that is dedicated to discussion between the board, and I am assured that that will be one of the topics. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to go over to Deanna Ginter.
Hi everyone, my name is Deanna. I am a former after-hours social worker who worked in regions 3 and 4, which are King County up to Canada and the border. And I worked for after hours for a little over 3.5 years. And I just wanted to come on and talk to you a little bit about things that I've experienced, and then also what some of my coworkers who maybe don't feel safe enough to report have experienced in working for after hours. First of all, some of the things that Secretary Hunter had mentioned earlier in this meeting, I am hesitant to point out which things that he said were false, but a lot of things that he said were false according to my own experience and things that I saw my coworkers going through. And I am happy to see that Patrick Dowd is doing an investigation. He's somebody that I have talked to. One thing that Secretary Hunter did say that was happening was that after hours workers have been made aware that it is an option for them to talk to ombuds. That's not something that I've experienced. I had been working for the department up until the end of June, and throughout that time, I consistently attended after hours meetings and reviewed notes from meetings that I was unable to attend. And that's not something that I ever knew of as a resource. Something I've talked to about, I've talked to some of my coworkers about this as well, and none of us knew that that was a resource. Something that we've experienced a lot throughout my time in after hours, and something I've talked to a lot of coworkers about as well, is that we haven't felt safe to report things that we felt were incorrect. There's a lot of reasons for these things, partially because we are all working in non-permanent positions. Also, when you're an on-call worker, the nature of your job is that supervisors get to call you when they need you. So in regards to, I think Senator Warnick had mentioned something about rumors that people are afraid of retaliation. And I think that's something that is true to my experience and some of my coworkers. It's not always retaliation that can be reported, and that's because of the nature of our non-permanent and on-call positions. So it's not things that we can necessarily prove, but it's certainly something that we experience. So I would really encourage all of you to be looking at the culture within DCYF of asking for and responding appropriately to feedback from people who work on the ground floor. I have experienced that sometimes leadership encourage us to provide feedback and ideas, but when I have done so, I've been dismissed or ignored. I've also felt that I've been retaliated against in some of those cases. I know that there are some changes that have been happening to try to help voices be heard within after hours unit, but I would also encourage you to look at those ideas and maybe ask for workers on the ground floor for their feedback and their ideas and how they feel safest reporting. So for example, there's been a few different things that have happened in Region 3 where they ask for feedback, and it seems anonymous. It seems like it would be safe to report, but it's not. So for example, something that happened throughout my time with DCYF was that every 6 to 12 months, a survey monkey would be sent out where you could provide feedback about individual supervisors. However, the after hours unit is very small, and it's pretty easy within that to identify who responded with what answers on the survey monkey. One of my coworkers even said that she was on the phone with one of the supervisors, and they mentioned that she and the AA were trying to figure out which survey monkey was hers. So that's one example of how it's the only option that was there didn't feel safe enough to report. So yeah, I guess I would just encourage you all to try to get ideas from people on the ground floor instead of deciding what is safe. Ask for ideas for what does feel safe. Because I think if there was a culture of safety in reporting things that we felt were incorrect or an abuse of power, we might not necessarily be here in this situation. Another thing that I experienced working in after hours was Secretary Hunter claimed that it's not practice for children to spend the night in cars. And I think Patrick Dowd also mentioned that from the children's perspective, they say we spent a night in a car. And from DCYF perspective, they say staff spent the time in the car trying to talk the youth into going into a placement. I would say that both of those things are true, because even if a social worker is spending the whole night in the car up until they can take the child to the office at 8 a.m., the staff are still trying to talk the child into going into the placement. And that's the reason that we are given as after hours workers for not taking the child to a more appropriate placement. It still isn't right that that's happening. And I would say that in my experience and in the experience that I've heard from my coworkers, it was a practice. It was expected that if a child refused a group home placement, that we would be instructed to stay in the car with the child, and sometimes even told to make the child uncomfortable as a way of forcing them into the placement. This is something I've also talked to, Patrick Dowd has interviewed me, and so I've reported all of this to him as well. But it's something that I wanted to tell you myself, because I have heard repeatedly Secretary Hunter deny that these things are happening.
Thank you, Deanna. Did that conclude?
Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Deanna. All of that was such valuable insight and perspective to share with us, and we appreciate you coming here. We are going to end our public comment with Representative Caldier.
Oh my goodness, I've been waiting so long. I was like, no.
I saw your face. No.
You know me so well. So I wanted to say that I actually take in the harder to place kids. In fact, during this whole thing, I had one that just got picked up today during the whole meeting. And one of the reasons why I reinstated my foster care license was to take in the hard to place kids and really have a grasp as to really trying to figure out what some of the problems are. And I was a little upset when I heard Secretary Hunter mention, and I'm going to talk to him about that as well, possibly considering taking some of these kids and putting them into an inpatient psychiatric care. If the kids are refusing a group home, there's probably a good chance they're going to possibly refuse the inpatient psychiatric care for long-term as well. And on top of that, I also serve as assistant ranking for health and wellness. And one of our biggest things is trying to get people out of the hospital setting and into a less restrictive setting. The other thing is that a lot of times the behaviors fluctuate. It may fluctuate based off of the children that they're around, things that are going on in their personal life, boyfriends, girlfriends, things like that. So you may have a child where they're suicidal, and it's a serious situation for one time, for a month or so, and their behaviors get better. And one of the biggest things that I've seen is that as the behaviors get better, then they're automatically placed into like a lower setting. So for example, with the BRS, kids don't qualify if their behaviors are better. And I have had quite a few children where they're doing the night to night, and they were former BRS, they were stable there. And they were told that once their behaviors got better, they no longer qualified. And the tough part is that with these tough teens, there's certain people like myself that I love them. I can take in a lot of these kids, and most of the times I don't get those same behaviors that are listed on their chipper. But if you take one of these kids and put them in a home where the parents aren't really geared for teenage behavior, typical teenage behavior and hard to place teenage behavior, then it doesn't work out. And I'm in Region 4, and there is a whole network of us foster parents where we'll take the harder to please kids. And I can obviously only do it for so certain amount of time just because of the legislative work that I do. But one of the things I've noticed with Region 4 is that we actually do have quite a bit of support with our after hours team. And for the most part, they actually do help with when there are issues and there are behavioral issues. And I think that that may be one of the problems that we have with the other two regions. Or I'm sorry, I'm not Region 4, I'm Region 5. That we may have with the other regions where it is more putting out fires and they don't have a good network of foster parents who are willing to take these kids. And I take in kids that are fresh out of the hospital. I take in kids fresh out of clip beds. I take in kids that are out of the group home or blow out of a group home because they beat up people. So I can tell you a lot of these kids can be placed in foster homes as long as there are supports when the behaviors flare up, because it's cyclical, or it comes in ebbs and flows. So you can have a kid where they maybe got in a fight with someone one night. Well, when they're with me, that maybe for a couple weeks or maybe for a month, I don't see those behaviors. But then something triggers them and they flare up. And as long as that there are supports available within DCYF, that I will continue to take those kids as long as I can get that help. So I will, Ross knows, I will give him a call and let him know exactly, some of the things that happened over this, this meeting. And I appreciate you guys for putting this on. And I appreciate King 5 for also bringing and shedding light to a lot of these problems and for all the public comment today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Caldier, and as always, bringing solutions. And thank you for caring for our kiddos. We appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and move into our next session of our agenda, and I'm going to turn it back over to Representative Dent.
Well, thank you. And I too would like to echo your statement. Thank you to all the folks that provided some public testimony here today. It's obviously that there are a lot of issues that are out in front of us. So bring it back to the board here. I think we've heard a lot of information today, both from our folks that just testified and also from the questions that were answered from Secretary Hunter. My opinion is, we got to about maybe 40% of the questions that were on our sheet, and I did try to mix them up a little bit. But I think there's a lot of answers there that I would still like to hear before I could actually to be fair, so we could take a look at all the allegations and all the issues that are in front of us, and so we could make some relatively intelligent decisions to on how we can deal with this. So I would actually like to hear from the board. Put your hands up or just chime in and kind of tell me what you're thinking and where you feel we should go. Personally, I think we need to, I want to review all the answers that the Secretary Hunter will send to us so I can give some serious thought to what's going on, and I can compare the answers to the questions. And I can kind of get maybe a little better feeling on where the department comes from my perspective. When we did this, the legislation to create the DCYF, we were focused on changing the culture and not rearranging the deck chairs. And I think that's part of our responsibility as an oversight committee is number one, to keep the DCYF on track, but number two, to help them be successful. And that's what I want to do, because I think our children, our child's welfare is very, very important. So anyway, with that being said, who would like to chime in? Please chime in, raise your hand. Senator Warnick has her hand up. We'll go with her.
And Representative Dent just took half of what I wanted to say. I supported the creation of DCYF and have been as involved as I can over the years because of the intention to change the culture CPS and how our children and families are treated when the children have issues. And the main reason too that I wanted to stay involved was former Senator Maureen Walsh. I can still hear her impassioned pleas to take this oversight board, take this DCYF to a point of trying to help families stay together, keep those kids with the parents, and help the parents to be successful, help the families to be successful. I was very interested in our first, I think her name was Valerie, or Victoria, I'm sorry, Victoria, talking about her experiences and family experiences. We had a family come in to our district office who are having issues, and you know the father is from a different country, and so we need to take into account cultures, not only the good old American culture, but the other cultures of other countries, of our immigrants. We need to take those into account when they are being approached by DCYF or other caseworkers, because there is a difference in perception. So I hope that we can keep looking at that as changing the culture of the state taking away and state taking on children, helping them to be successful. And Representative Caldier spoke very, very well about the kids that she takes in. And she said it can be done just with some support from DCYF. And that's what I want to see happen in the best manner possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We'll go with Dr. Levy.
So there are two things that kind of struck me. One is that we have to continue moving upstream to make impact. And I think we spent so much of our time this morning talking about the situation of some very involved youth. And I think of it sort of as, a triangle. If we can build those supports earlier, then there are less kids that get up here that need those kind of $50,000 clip beds or whatever we're looking at. And I feel like in our discussion today, we really don't talk about that. We talk about kind of what we're doing in a reactive way, and we don't really talk about what we can do in a proactive fashion. And so I think that would be one of the things from our board that I would like to hear from Secretary Hunter is, where are we going to move that needle upstream so that we can be more proactive? So that's my first comment. And the second comment is about oversight. And I really want to thank Megan, your comments about that. It is very murky to me, and I'm sure to the rest of the board right now, as to what is actually going on when somebody has a case present and a child has been taken and they're going through the process, and who is this kind of consultant group that is providing the comments. I think we need a little more clarity on that, on what kind of oversight and what that actually looks like. It just feels a little bit capricious, like we don't really know if one person's looking or if there's numerous people looking, and also, where does the family have a voice in that? And so I think we need to think of maybe also about looking at the oversight process as well. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And I really appreciate your comments on going upstream and finding some solutions before so we're not reactive. So we're more acting and not being reactive. I appreciate that. Annie Blackledge.
Thank you, Representative Dent. And Diane, I think you and I need to spend some more time together because we seem to be of like minds. I want to name it. We need to be taking a public health approach to the work that we're doing. And that involves more than just one system. And I know we do not have oversight over the education system or the mental health system or the DD system, but I do think we need to be looking at that intersectionality. And I'm going to share this on behalf of my person and not where I work, which is Mockingbird Society, but as an alumni of foster care and as an alumni who got guardianship over her brother, who was also in foster care, who was developmentally delayed and later developed mental health systems. I believe that our kids with developmental disabilities are incredibly overlooked in our system, and it's because they fall between the cracks. And we absolutely need to focus on them, because I think when we look downstream, upstream, downstream, but when we look at our prisons and we look at our mental health systems, and even as a provider back in the day when I was doing housing for young people exiting out of foster care, our systems were not designed to work with young people with cognitive disabilities. And I really think that that is a deep part of the work that I hope we will be doing. And I'll be interested to see Patrick's breakdowns for that. And then lastly, to speak to what Representative Caldeer had said, and something that I think we all need to think about in the context of this work, is that we're not paper people. I wrote a poem when I was about 16 years old about watching my case file grow over a tabletop in front of multiple social workers over time, and how their opinions of me were based on what other people wrote down in a moment in time, and I was never given a chance to just be me. And I believe that there are folks like Representative Caldeer and others who do give young people that opportunity to be who they are and be allowed to have problems and not have to be perfect and not just rely on what the person said before them. So there's a balance here, and it's hard in a bureaucracy to humanize things, but I hope we can hold that in our hearts as we move forward in our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, for those right on comments. I appreciate that. Sharonda, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to kind of be reflective just from some of the public comments and just the overall issues that we were faced with today. And what I'm struck by, of course, is some of the onus that went on to disruptive children and their behaviors. And I also am very clear that, you know, the involvement in child welfare manufactures some of these exasperating behaviors and the inability to place. And as Caldeer had mentioned, you know, the need for resources, and when people are properly resourced, hard to place children at the center of it, just really want to be connected, want to have love and stability. And, you know, those are just what we all want. And so without those, we see an onslaught of behaviors that are hard to get to or to address. And so what I'm thinking about is also from Diane and Annie's lens around prevention and the resources necessary to keep children home. And if they're not at home, what needs to happen to get them home? You know, the amount of money that's being spent for the out-of-home placements and the exhaustion of already a limited workforce we're not helping the problem. We're creating even more and more problems. And so I'm hoping that us as a support to the department and moving forward is really identifying what that looks like and what are the gaps. We do have the legislation here, legislators here, as Representative Sin expressed, you know, the lack of mental health services that need to be in place for families and children to get to the services needed to just kind of address those basic needs in some respects. So I'm hoping that will also be centered in part of our conversation. I do recognize that trauma looks different for everyone, but I do not want to be, I would be remiss as my position as a parent advocate, not to talk about the trauma of these parents, because the way that it presented itself, it was that these were abandoned children. And some of these children have parents that are just, you know, absolutely floored and devastated not to have their child in their presence. And so I also want to just bring that to the surface, because I know this not to, I'm not, this is a truth, and I know it factually, that there are parents that desperately want their children. So that needs to be a center of this conversation too, not where we put them, but how do we get them back?
Thank you, Sharonda. And I agree to that. And I actually have several families that I'm working with right now that really are struggling with why their kids are not with them and want to find an avenue to have their kids returned. And they're very, very frustrated with that point. And some of you, I haven't told this story to everyone. I'm not going to tell the story in its entirety today. But I've talked about one of the foster kids here in my community who had been removed from her home and absolutely hated where she was at. And the only thing she could talk about was going back to her birth family. That's where she wanted to be. And I know she lived in a different culture. And she struggled with being forced to live another way. And I think that's something we need to kind of take a hard look at as well, because I believe that these kids, most kids want to be with their parents, good, bad, indifferent. They want to be there. And I think as long as there's a reasonable, we can expect a reasonable amount of safety, that's where they should be. And only remove them in extreme circumstances. And we've heard of that today. And some of this, this is just me talking a little bit. I want you guys to I would like to have some feedback, but when I see these kids that are very hard to handle, and so we're keeping them in motel rooms or other places, in the office buildings or whatever, it doesn't seem appropriate. They may be acting out because they want to be home, and there's some of that too. And as a former foster parent who, like Representative Caldier, took hard kids, tough kids, kids that were really willing to take on the world. They had a chip on their shoulder, and they weren't so hard to handle if you loved them, and gave them some fences. They wanted some boundaries, gave them some boundaries, and they was okay. But that's what they asked for. That's in my experience. So I think there are ways to satisfy this, and I agree with Representatives. We don't have enough mental health services in the state. We need more to help some of our young people, and they're struggling. We're living in a tough time, a struggling time in our history, and they're struggling as well. So anyway, we have some other comments. Lois Martin has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Representative Dent. So what I'd like to see as we move forward as a group is to be able to have additional updates from Patrick Dowd and his group on the process of how their investigation is going. That we need to be apprised of that and not wait until December. And then as well as we didn't get through all the questions from to Director Hunter with the seriousness of these allegations, I think it would be imperative for our group to be able to hear those responses, not in writing, but in person again. And then that also gives them a chance to update us on what progress the department is making to ensure that situations like this don't come up again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lois, and I think those are spot on comments. I would like to see, receive the answers to the questions in writing, and then I was also going to propose that perhaps we could come back within a month or 6 weeks with another full board meeting and have Secretary Hunter come back as well as Patrick Dowd, and we could follow up. I know that all of us are going to have more questions probably by tomorrow morning, or I'll have more questions by midnight when I wake up thinking about this. And, and I think it'll be an opportunity to talk about this. And if we're going to support the department, I think that's fair to do that. And if there's issues going on that we can help with, I think that's fair too. But I view that as our role, to not only be to keep them on track, but to be supportive as well. So if anyone has any comments about having another meeting in a month or 6 weeks, and then if we have this additional information, I think would be good for us all to study up a little bit more. Some of us have studied this probably in greater depth than others, but I understand that. Annie has her hand up. Oh, Annie has her thumb up, and so does Lois. Okay. Bobby Bridge, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to say that I think this has been one of our best sessions. I missed the last one, which everybody thought was also one of your best, our best. And I really can relate and agree with everything that's been said. And yet maybe as the oldest person on this group, I just kind of am confounded in a way that here we are still talking about this. We know 6 years the ombuds has been working on this, and not to cast aspersions at all, because he is singularly also been without the facts in many instances, and is only allowed kind of as much as he can get, and certainly doesn't have the power of subpoena. Can't force people. So I mean, so we're left with King 5, God bless, because they found people who were willing to talk and go on the record, and very bravely do so. So I guess here's my thought. I mean, yes, we need to focus on prevention. And yes, we need to do this through a lens, whatever we're doing, through a lens of public health. And we're not going to be siloing kids. So we should be looking at available resources, whether they're more typically available to juvenile offenders than they are to child welfare kids. I mean, that kind of language ought not to pass our lips anymore, because a huge part of the value of having this department is precisely so that we can look at kids and families holistically, because families are going to have little ones and families are going to have big ones, and they maybe have troubles together, right? And that's what we're really trying to identify, and to empower that family unit. Because boy, Representative Dent, I mean, that was one of my big aha moments, was when I became more able to talk to, in particular, the Mockingbird kids, but other kids who came to our annual youth leadership summits, foster kids who did. And I just heard over and over again a lot of wisdom about the various disabilities or different difficulties that their parents faced, and how their parents were not necessarily able to care for them at that particular moment. But boy, they really wanted to go back to them, and they wanted to go back as soon as possible. And that kind of sense is, if left unaddressed, is what gets us into all of these intergenerational traumas, intergenerational poverty. All of this is because we're just not focusing on what's right in front of our face. So I guess the frustration too is, remember FAR? I mean, that was supposed to keep kids safely at home. And I don't know, I was just talking to former Representative Kagi the other day, and neither one of us recall if or when any of the evaluations of FAR came out. But that was supposed to be a huge change in culture, and have the ability to not just separate the child even before they saw had a judicial determination that there should be a different placement. And whoever said that in the public comment is exactly right. I mean, it does kind of start a snowball process once that child has left the home, because we know that each move further traumatizes the child. Okay, but FAR, I mean, we've got that. We've got Families First from the federal level that, incentivizes keeping families together and providing these services at home. So it's not that we're without tools and resources and experience. And it seems to me that where we can help the department is to help them finally put these policy decisions, these resources into position. And look at, I mean, this is in a way really great. And we have 70 to 80 kids focused on. If we get it right for them, I'm a great believer that we can get it right for everybody, because the same kind of improvement in practices, in attitude toward families, in respect for families, if we do it in the 70 to 80 kids, who may have, and I don't want to miss out on the mental health aspects of this too. Wow, just think of how much of a difference we could make for the 7,000, and also maybe bring Secretary Hunter's expressed desire to make foster care, to abolish foster care, but at least certainly have it again, and maybe have that again, HALVE. Because we are focusing. I think we just get so distracted and kind of we are running to the current problem. So I say stop, we are on a problem, and this particular problem is of such magnitude and of such complexity that it really has aspects of every other part of this system. And if we get it right with these folks, and we have some tools already in place that we can, and some policy directives already in place that we can, then we're going to make it work. So let's do it.
Well, thank you, Bobby. Those are good comments. I appreciate your experience and your insight into this entire child welfare system. Representative Stanton, I saw your hand up. Did you take it down?
Thank you, Chair Jen. I've been wavering about, about whether I should comment or not. I've been in and out of this meeting, so I apologize. I had a couple other things, so I may have missed some relevant things, and these might have been touched on. I do just want to, reiterate, and building on what has just been said, and just on the whole conversation. DCYF is 3 years old now. I think maybe 4, but 3 years old. We created them to help change the culture. So a lot of these problems, that's exactly why we have DCYF. A lot of, the youth that we're dealing with that we were talking about today, who are teenagers, went through a system a lot of them went through a system from the get-go that was not the way it should be, and hence the creation of DCYF. And so we have both the challenge of addressing the now of what has happened to these kids, and then also looking at the future and where we want to create a better system. I think the other challenge that I want to make sure that we're also talking about and figuring out how we can use both our oversight and our relationships, that these are, as much as we've combined child welfare, early learning, and JR now, a lot of these issues are also with mental health, which is in a completely different agency, and developmental disabilities, which is in a completely different agency. And I think figuring out, and this I think is a challenge both for DCYF and I know legislatively, of how do we highlight these concerns and these issues and get the needs and the services available when we're advocating for another agencies to do something else that's going to help us. And so figuring out how we can work with other colleagues who are on different committees to emphasize the importance of, mental health treatment and paying and having those beds and having that, workforce. How can we, work together with DD administration to have a more collaborative approach? And there's going to be a new head of that, and there's a new head of Medicaid. So I think there's some really big changes that are coming up that I think are going to be advantageous. So, none of this to say, all of this to say that there are so many, there are lots of moving pieces, and I think there's a lot of effort to right the ship, and it is I don't think it's as much as just move a child out of a hotel room. There's all the 1,000 layers behind. And so I think we need to do both the immediate and continue to make sure that we're looking at and addressing some of these long-term issues, and how do we work and acknowledge and work and push through those, all working together as well.
Thank you, Representative Sen. We've been on the same page for a long time with some of this, that's for sure. I appreciate that. I appreciate you and your knowledge and experience as well. Sharonda.
I also just want us to go back, spend some time on the hotel piece. The Dr. Wood piece is, I have to tell you, really concerning, particularly with the department's response and the public's experience, because they are not in alignment. And I'm wondering, just from our position of asking for a little bit more of investigation into, those cases, because what I feel like, particularly from one of the public comments today, is that, the department's we have enough fail-safe that, somewhere along the line, someone would have gotten this right. And I just don't believe that that's true. And so I'm wondering for ourselves as a board, where are we in pushing that and asking them to do a deeper dive into those decisions that were made and those families that potentially are still separated based on that information.
I agree, Sharona. So do we have any other comments from any of the board members?
I would just comment,
Good.
thank you, Chair Dent, that I think we should talk to council about this issue because I think these are individual cases. I think they're legal responses, and there's and so I think we should have a conversation offline with Stacia and leadership of the Oversight Board a little bit more about these would be my suggestion.
No, that's a good suggestion, and I agree. Was there someone else?
Yeah, just me.
Diane?
I feel like there's, what I heard from him is that he's relying on his consultants from Seattle Children's Hospital and Mary Bridge Children's Hospital. And so there's a sense of distancing there. In other words, I don't know, and I don't honestly know what our role is when we're looking at who they're using as consultants, but I think it's certainly we could ask for more information about what that process looks like without getting into individual cases. And I think that might be helpful in elucidating to get a better sense of what their process is, who they are using, et cetera.
That's an excellent idea.
This is Lois. I just want to echo what Diane just said, just so you know, that was going to be my comment as well.
Thank you, Lois. So, I mean, what I see here is a couple of different issues. I mean, number one is we do have an issue that has been brought to light from the King 5 investigation, and I think we owe it to our constituents or the state of Washington to dive into this and to make sure that we're on track, and we're seeing that the DCYF is moving forward in a positive direction so we can eliminate this in the future. I think that's important. And then, what I see is there's been several suggestions here on how we can, maybe move upstream, how we can improve the system, how we can talk with the DCYF about how we could change what we're looking at in the future, which goes back to changing the culture, which many of us have talked about already. So I actually see a couple of different directions we can go, but I think that the immediate need is, and I would like to do this with your permission, and I'd like to put these answers together from Secretary Hunter and from Patrick Dowd and get them out to everyone, and then look for another meeting to come back together so everyone has clarification on where we're at, how we got to where we were, and then how we're going to move forward in the future so we don't go there again. I think that's an answer that the folks in the state of Washington are asking for. So if anyone has any comments about that, if not, I will probably move in that direction. Thank you, Annie. And Bobby, thank you.
Yeah, I have one quick comment, and I really appreciate King 5 doing the investigation. I don't want to see, I want to see the next headline that DCYF has found a solution, or we as collectively have found a solution for these kids, because there was a headline about they're not going to put them in hotels, but now what? And so we need to find a solution. I want to see that as the next headline.
That's a great comment, Senator. Thank you. I agree. Senator Darnell, I can see it coming. Yeah, your mind is moving.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been moving the whole time, and it's been moving for more than the last 3 years. I think we ought to take a pause and remember that over 80 children were in out-of-state placements, and we had no knowledge about the conditions of their care, and we had no reporting to the legislature whatsoever on that issue. So we actually have come a long way, and we shouldn't be afraid of more information. I'm not saying one thing or another about the King 5 investigation. It raised an issue, but we've been raising issues for 3 years now as an oversight board. And I think that this is another piece, another way of looking at information, and that we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should continue to probe and continue to get more understanding and appreciation for what staff particularly are facing in the middle of the night, and trying to put ourselves in their shoes. But I really want to say, I think that if we're questioning whether or not standing up DCYF was a good idea, or that the department has been not responsible in some way, I really caution us about that kind of pointed work. I think that we are moving, evolving, and I really appreciate the position we're in now with more information, so much better than the position we were in more than 3 years ago. We had no information, only fear, only anxiety, only anger. So I think we've got more to learn. And I'm pleased with this is now I think the third time I've talked with or listened to Secretary Hunter on these points. And I certainly see the department being responsive to questions from all of us. And so as we sort of narrow those questions, though, I think we could be more thoughtful in how we can actually apply the answer. But I don't know, Senator Warnick, if we'll ever be to a point where we can say that no child is having a bad experience. This is a traumatizing experience from the moment law enforcement or a teacher or a doctor have made a referral to the department. And it's something I think we all are growing into, our emotional understanding of what children are going through. And Representative Sen, you're absolutely right. We've got all these different silos, and the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Task Force is certainly addressing things. I don't know if we've talked about sort of what they've been evolving, but we've got over 70 professionals that are engaged with that group. And we were able to take all of their recommendations for budget enhancements and program enhancements. We funded every single thing in the budget this last year. So we should be extremely proud, I think, as an overall system of saying that we're going to be addressing children's behavioral health issues in a more broad-based and inclusive and equity-focused way. So I'm pretty excited about the budget that just went into effect a couple weeks ago. And I think we should be watching that as we move forward to see how the programs that were developed, which do affect the subset population of youth in foster care a great deal. So thank you. Looking forward to the future.
Thank you, Senator. And it seems as though I saw you just had a birthday recently, I believe. So happy belated birthday.
I'm 72 in the 27th district, which I'd rather be 27 in the 72nd district. We don't have that many.
Yeah, well. So thank you. So do we have any other comments here? But we have a few minutes left on our scheduled agenda. If not, then I guess do we need a motion to adjourn? I'm always been a little unclear on that, but I guess if we do, I would entertain that motion. If not, I would adjourn the meeting. So I'll just adjourn the meeting.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Stacia. You adjourning the meeting is just fine.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Appreciate that. Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone's input today and your engagement in this issue. I appreciate each and every one of you. So looking forward to the next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.